Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast at the card table, in which we discuss creation, practice, performance, and history with the greatest minds of magic. If you're tuned in on YouTube, you will be watching an almost unedited video podcast of myself and the guest talking, but if you are tuned in on Apple or Spotify, you will be listening to a fine-tuned version that should be a lot audibly smoother. Either way, you're getting the same content and I hope you guys enjoy it. Today's guest is a renowned comedy magician working at the likes of the world-famous Magic Castle, the House of Cards, and most recently the Chicago Magic Lounge, performing his vaudevillian-style magic and sideshow. It is, of course, the incredible Mark James. How are we doing today, Mark? You well?
Is this us doing it now? Have we started?
We are in. We are right
let's
in
go.
there.
It's very exciting. Most recently at the Chicago Magic Lounge. Actually, I've got an exclusive for you that nobody knows yet. I've just booked the Chicago Magic Lounge for July. So I'll be back there in July of 2025.
Perfect. Mark it in your diaries if you're anywhere near Chicago at the time.
And if you're listening to this in the year 3050, when society has crumbled, I was at the Chicago Magic Lounge in 2025.
Which is no longer a thing. It's just a pile of rubble.
A pile of rubble, yeah.
Like every other brick and mortar magic shop and performance space. Perfect. So the best way for us to get to know you is through a series of quickfire questions. Obviously, I know you. We've known each other for a little while. We've even run half marathons together. That's how much we know each other.
You look a lot more like you've run half marathons than I do, but people will not believe that I ran 5 of them last year.
Yeah, sensational. And I mean, it's a lot of fun. Obviously, we know each other, but for the guests out there who don't know you, I've got a series of quickfire questions, just the same that we have with every guest, just so that we can get to know you nice and quickly. And the first one is, what is your favorite sleight? This doesn't necessarily have to be like a card sleight. It could be something with props. It could be something mentalism or billet related. What is your favorite sleight?
Well, it's funny actually, because when Corey asked me, well, firstly, the first thing you should know about me is that quickfire is very much not my thing. I'm a bit more of a rambler.
Not anyone's thing, don't worry.
When Corey asked me to do this podcast, he said, I'll send you the questions over. And I said, I don't want to see any of the questions at all. I just want to riff as we go along. But you did say to me, well, I'll just send you the quickfire questions so that you're not stumbling or whatever. And I said, okay. So I've seen the quickfire questions. And I have to say that when you sent me your favorite sleight, it didn't even occur to me that you didn't mean a card sleight. So I've got 2 answers, and my card sleight answer would be a diagonal palm shift, because
Love that.
it's tricky enough that it makes you feel challenged when you're learning it, but also it's got this really nice mechanical fluidity to it that when you get the card in a position where you're then going to pivot it out, there's a nice thing that happens there. You feel it. It's like a rotor turning in your hand. And so I really like a diagonal palm shift for the way that it feels when you're doing it. And it's probably the sleight that I go to most frequently when I'm just holding playing cards, and also in a 8 cards to pocket routine that I do, which is only 8 cards and they all go to pockets at different times. It's a sleight that I use in that routine, and it's quite difficult to pull off with only 4 cards at that point that I'm at, but I've practiced to the point that I'm more than comfortable to do it. And so I think if anyone's going to choose a sleight that they really like, it's probably going to be something that they can do pretty well, but also is not something mega simple. And that falls straight into that category for me. If I was going to pick a non-card sleight, which I never thought of until this moment, the answer is really obvious, and it's the Vernon Mora 1 spin vanish. You know, you take like a ball and you spin the wand over and above and you steal the ball out. And I've been doing a lecture tour the last few months and teaching that move, and I was doing it every night on the tour. And then at one point I said, you know, if you don't have the confidence to try this, let me just show you what it looks like with a giant ball. And I took the orange that I use in the cups and balls, and I did the same sleight with the orange, and it fried everybody. And I didn't realize how good the move really was. And so then after that, my friend Darren, who toured around the lectures with me, started videoing that bit every night. And every night I did this sleight with an orange or a cricket ball or whatever. And every night it looked great. And so it's one of those sleights that you just have to believe that it's going to look right. But when you do it right, it's so strong and so fooling. And again, it's that when you do the wand spin, there's a mechanical fluidity to it as well. So I guess that all of the things I like in terms of sleights are things that are a challenge to learn. But when you learn them, they feel really natural. That's kind of the key things I'm picking out of that. So yeah, diagonal palm shift, Vernon Mora 1 spin, vanish. Die Vernon, silent Mora, one spin vanish. They're my answers.
Perfect. Yeah, it's that level of satisfaction that you gain from something that you know you've really worked.
Yeah.
Obviously, in your hands when it's buttery smooth and you don't have to think about it, you don't even have to be looking. It's engaging and talking and really focusing on story and how you're getting across to the people. There's
I have to
something
admit though,
so
every now and
satisfying.
again, I still mess it up enough times that I think, oh, I could still work on this. Like I do the Vernon Mora one spin in cups and balls every single night in my show. And, out of 5 or 6 nights of the week, there'll be one where I think, I could have been a bit better. And so I keep working. And then, in the diagonal palm shift, I typically do that at dinner theater venues, like you mentioned, like the
Yeah.
Chicago Magic Lounge or the Magic Castle. And so then I'll be doing the show 3, 4, sometimes at the House of Cards in Nashville. You do the show 6 times in a night sometimes.
Jeez.
And out of 6 shows in a night, it might be 1 or 2 where I think, oh, that could have been better. So actually, I don't want it to be ever perfect. I always want to think there's room, but it's good, but it's working, but there's room to make it better. And I stay obsessed with it.
Oh, there's always that room, isn't there? Especially with technical moves. It's enough to be like satisfactory, but it still keeps you humble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. The next sort of quickfire question is, what is your favorite plot in
Uh,
Magic?
well, the really obvious answer to me of a thing that I've been obsessed with since I ever first saw it
I think I
is
know what you're gonna say.
I think you know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say something different. I think you think I'm going to say the orange tree, the Robert Houdin thing.
No, I assumed you were gonna say cups and balls.
Oh, okay. Wow. So, no, I mean, I do like cups and balls, but my two standouts are the Robert Houdin orange tree, and I have a tattoo of it on the back of my leg. And I have a funny story about it too. But the other one, the one that I think is really my favorite, is the many drinks, the any drink called for from a kettle.
Oh
I
yeah.
just think pouring, or hospitality, the Jim Steinmeier version, I think pouring multiple drinks out of the same vessel and then showing that that thing is empty at the end. Lance Burton did a brilliant version of it on a special once with a milk carton, and he brought a kid up and
Yeah.
he tore the carton open at the end. I saw Paul Daniels do it when I was a kid. I've seen brilliant pictures of Steve Cohen doing it, and it's a huge part of his show. I nearly owned one as well for a really brief. I nearly got one, and someone else ended up buying it before me. But I think if there was anything I would like to put in my show in the future, that's definitely the trick for me. That it's whimsical. It's got all of the things that I like in a good trick. It involves audience members without bringing them up on stage, which is something I don't love getting people on stage. So, but I do use a bunch of audience members in different ways. I just don't bring someone up just to shuffle a deck of cards and stand there. If they're going to come on stage with me, it has to be a really meaty part that they're going to get. So the drink called for, you're speaking to loads of people, but they're not coming up. I just love that. But the Robert Houdin thing, actually, last year I was in California doing the Magic Castle, and my friend Taylor said to me one day, "Do you want to spend the day? We'll go over to John Gorn's workshop and hang out." And I was like, "Yeah, this is my dream. This is about as good as it gets." So we go to John Gorn's workshop, and I see this orange tree in the corner, and I say to John, "Oh, wow, you have an orange tree." And he says, "I have the orange tree." And I said, "Yeah,
Jeez.
an orange." And he goes, "No, that's Robert Houdin's one." So now I'm just blown away. So I go over and I get a photograph with it. It's like, to me, that's like meeting a celebrity. That's about as good as it gets. That's like the Ark of the Covenant or something. That's my. So I get a picture, and John Gorn says to me, "You really like this trick, don't you?" And I said, "I've actually got a tattoo of it on the back of my leg." So I show him, and he can't believe it. So then I'm on a ladder facing the wall, and John Gorn's getting a picture with the orange tree and the back of my leg. And they're all on my Instagram. So it was so funny. And then while we're standing there getting these pictures taken, John looks out the door and says, "Oh, Jim just turned up." And I think, I wonder who Jim is. I'm thinking it's the sandwich delivery guy. And then Jim Steinmeier walks in. And so now it's
Jeez.
like I'm already having, dinner with Santa Claus, and the Easter Bunny walked in. So it was the best day of my life ever, and I say that as a man who is married and has a child. It doesn't get much better than that. So I saw the original Orange Tree. I saw John Gorn and Jim Steinmeier all on the same day, and it was fantastic. And actually, if I tell you the next part of this story, which is even more ridiculous, people won't even believe me. But Taylor, who I was talking about, he took a tour of Houdini's old house in New York. And on the day that he took the tour, they'd had a flood, a leak in the roof a few days earlier. So the desk and everything that had been in Houdini's office were all moved out the way, and the floor was completely, bare. And Taylor said, what are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're having to pull the floorboards up because we've had a leak." And Taylor said, "Are they the original floorboards from early 1900s?" And the guy said, "They're the floorboards that Houdini walked on." And Taylor said, "What are you going to do with them?" And he said, "We're going to put them in a skip." And Taylor said, "Can I take the floorboards?" And so he did. So that day, we're at John Gorn's workshop. We started a process of turning those floorboards into magic wands, which, and I'm going to have one, and Taylor's going to have one. So these floorboards that Houdini walked around on and, dreamt about his
No
act,
way.
I'm going to be using that wand in my cups and balls routine soon. So sometimes from a tiny acorn of a thing, an insane amount of, things can take off and happen. And that was a pretty special day for me. But again, very much not a quick fire answer. I like the anything called for plot.
Perfect. That doesn't even sound real. Like,
Yeah.
there are far too many coincidences in that for it to even be feasible. And I can't imagine yourself being in that situation.
Oh
Like,
well, I mean, there's another funny part to that as well. That John was when John was getting the picture taken, he said to me, "Oh, there's a very particular detail on this tattoo you have," and I recognize that detail because that's an orange tree that I made, and I only made one of it. And I
no
said, "Oh,
way.
whose is it?" And he said, "Well, I made that one for John Carney for his act." And I said, "Oh, that's incredible." And he said, "Actually, we're repairing it. It's over there." And so in the room is the orange tree that I gave my tattooist the picture of when I just Googled the trick. The exact one is sitting on a table in the room. So my tattoo was reunited with its exact mate.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah,
That's
crazy.
absolutely absurd. Hey, that must have been one hell of a day. I mean, even just meeting those guys and spending time with them, but as you say, the ones that you're creating as well. Is that
Yeah.
something that's going to be potentially available for purchase for other people, or is
No,
this a
there wasn't enough, unfortunately. There's only going to
fair?
be, I think, three or four, and Taylor's going to have one. I'm going to have one. I assume John Gorn is going to keep one, and the fourth, I don't know, maybe maybe the David Copperfield Museum, who knows? But yeah, it's a pretty great day, and we went for In-N-Out Burger afterwards, so doesn't get any better than that.
Really bring it full circle. Fair play. That sounds absolutely incredible, and obviously to have those pieces of history from what seems like, as you said, they were just going to chuck them out. It seemed like nothing, but to people like ourselves, it's a piece of history. So,
I worry that as this podcast goes on, or any podcast or anything, that people, so much of life, especially in my life, I feel so much of it sounds unbelievable, but it's because I just live all the time open to everything. When you message me about doing the podcast, you can say what I said. Don't tell me anything. Just tell me what time I got to be there.
yeah,
I never say no to anything. I never turn down opportunities. I just walk into everything with my eyes and arms open and just say, let's see what happens, because you find so much, and I made so many good friends that way, and so many exciting things happen. And this kind of that situation that took place was again just down to being open-minded and letting things happen. It's that's the way to be, I guess.
100%. That's such a beautiful piece of advice for everyone. And I mean, if we ended the podcast there, that's a perfect piece of advice to end on. So let's not end the podcast there. Let's continue. But obviously, you are very well versed in the history of magic. You're very well versed in the likes of books and things like that. Do you have a particular favorite book or favorite books? I know that's like picking a favorite child, but if you had
Yeah,
to pick
this is a
one, what would it
tricky
be?
one actually. And because I knew this answer, this question was coming, I prepared in this sense. So I have a few, but
Perfect.
I picked my actual favorite for last, but I chose six, and all for different reasons.
Quickfire.
So quickfire, yeah. So the first one is not a magic instructional book, but it's this. It is Carter Beats the
Ah,
Devil.
incredible book.
And I have read this book more times than I can possibly care to even tell you. I'm obsessed with it. And I find that there are a couple of books. Steve Martin has a book called Born Standing Up, and he writes about his experiences of starting out and being a kid and learning magic and then becoming a famous stand-up. And it kind of ends when he gets into movies. But that part of his career where there's a part where he talks about dragging his prop case up a hill to the Coffee and Confusion Comedy Club, was an open mic kind of club. And I resonate with that story so much because, I drag my case around the world and around the country to do shows in the hope that something will happen. And I find that that book, it just kind of refuels me in some ways. And there's a great sentence he says in it, which is, there is no, he says, over the years, I've learned that there is no harm in charging oneself up with delusion in between valid moments of inspiration. And I find that that book really recharges me in a way that says, just keep going. This person did that. And this book does that too. This book recharges me in an aesthetic and world building sense. Because when you start to read this book, this is like a magic version of The Great Gatsby. When you read the first paragraph of The Great Gatsby, you know that you are in the company of a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
And just the opening part of it is incredible. And it puts you straight into this world. And this book does that too. And it talks about, vanishing elephants and conspiracies. And there's a great thing where the president is involved with a trick. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's one of the best books ever. And actually, it's been one of the thrills of my life that I've become friends with Glenn David Gold, who wrote this book.
Jeez.
Via Instagram. I posted a thing and he commented on a video that I made, and we started a casual conversation. And now via Instagram, I talk to him every now and again. And I told him how much this book means to me, and he, was thrilled. And so I'm hoping that next time I go to LA, I'll get the chance to meet up with him. But I've been reading this book since I was 20 years old, since it came out. So the idea that I now know this writer in some way is amazing to me. So this book's up there, but it's not the one because it's not a magic instructional book. This book,
they don't have to be magic instructional books, just for
well, a couple of the rest of them kind of are. This one's seriously silly. I used to work in JB Magic, and I did do kid shows at once upon a time, but I've long since given it up. But I got this book when I worked there, and I learned more about entertaining adults from a book about entertaining kids than almost any other book I've ever read. Because if you understand the advice in this, you also can understand the opposite of the advice in this, the things that work for kids that work differently for adults. This book gives you like an antidote in some ways to entertaining adults as well, but also it's brilliant advice for entertaining children. And it's just a fantastic book. And I really, really recommend it. And I really enjoy books that have stories in. And this book's got stories in about performing for celebrities, kids, and all that sort of stuff. So I think that would be a surprising choice for me. But Seriously Silly is a brilliant book, and I wholeheartedly recommend it.
children's entertainment book was not something I expected on the list. So
No, it's a surprise. I'm also not a mentalist, but The Mental Mysteries of Hector Chadwick,
also phenomenal.
Is a brilliant book. And the thing that I really love about this is a piece of, I don't think there are any tricks in here that I would find in my show necessarily, but there's a brilliant piece of advice when he says that he hates magicians or mind readers or whoever introducing the concept of a prediction in a casual way. Like, here I have a prediction, I'll put it on the side. And he says that if you could see the future, essentially you'd be a bit more excited about it. So it's either don't say this is a prediction, or do say it, but give it some weight. So now I have one trick in my show where I take that advice very literally and I say, I have seen the future, I've written it down, and it is inside of this envelope. And I will show it to you when the time is right, but the time is not right now. So until then, I will leave it right here. But this is quite possibly the most important piece of information that I will, and I really make a thing out of it. And I took that advice very directly from this book. And any book that you learn something that changes the way you do things is great. If there's a book that you get an actual routine out of, then that's like gold. But this is a fantastic book, and anybody, no matter what kind of entertainer you are, would benefit from reading the stuff that's inside of it. So I love that.
100% agree. I think books that you can take little tidbits of knowledge like that, are so much more valuable than here's a trick, here's a trick, here's a trick. Because at the end of the day, I feel like most people aren't going to be taking tricks and putting them into their working repertoire that they've been doing for 10, 20 plus years. But those little things that can really change and adapt their scripting or storytelling or the way that they do things are monumental.
It's not always easy as well if you don't have a lot of experience to recognize things within someone else's routine that are applicable or that you could reuse in your own work. Sometimes people read routines and they only see the thing as a whole. They don't see it as a set of individual decisions. And so they can't take one of those decisions out and use it themselves. So books that have great essays in, like that one does, I think they stand out to me. This is something that almost nobody ever seems to have seen. It is called A Professional Magician's Bathroom Reader, and it's written by
Also
Mark
never seen it.
Kornhauser. He's pretty much a genius and one of the best stand-up magicians of all time. And this is a collection of his columns that he wrote in Magic Magazine. It's Magic, yeah. I always get confused between Magic and Genie. But this is a collection of columns from Magic Magazine. They're all brilliant. They're really, really smart. But one of them directly altered the way that I run my entire business.
Jeez.
And if anyone knows any of my work or has seen me posting online, you will notice that you never ever see a thing that says I'm on at a place and that's it, like Mark James Tonight. It is always the show. It's always Mark James presents Wonders, Curious Mysteries, The Vanishing Elephant, Instant Magic, Sideshow Tricks, whatever it is. I always, always, always give my show a name. And that's because Mark Kornhauser told me to. He has a great thing in here where he says, if you want to work in Las Vegas, and as soon as you read a sentence like that, if you've got any brain, you pay attention, because that's where he worked. He says, you should know that producers in Vegas hate an expensive act, but they love a cheap show. And the difference between an expensive act and a cheap show is sometimes very little. And it can be something like giving your show a name. Because if it's tonight we've got Mark James, that has a value. But if it's tonight we've got Mark James presents Curious Mysteries, that has a completely different value.
Yeah.
It's a package and it's a product. And people just sort of instinctively understand that there's an extra value in that. But also giving your show a name can help to inform decisions. Sometimes the best trick in the world is not the best trick for your show as a whole. And sometimes doing a weaker trick that serves a narrative is better for the show in general. And that's lessons that you learn quite a long way down the path, I think. But that lesson started for me in 2015 when I first read this. And there are a bunch of different articles in here that are really, really worth reading. And if you can get it, this is gold dust. It's honestly brilliant. Just read one of them every day and see if you can action it, and you'll learn a bunch. So this is brilliant. And nobody's ever heard of it. So
I feel like this podcast already, even just the past, what, like 20 minutes that we've been talking, we've already
Quickfire.
gotten so many lovely little tidbits and like tiny bits of advice that take years, like, of experience and things like that. So if you're not already, grab a piece of paper and pen because shit's about to get real. Take notes.
Start again, yeah. I never hold anything back. I'm not really like that's just not my way. So the next one is this Stand-Up Card Magic by Roberto Giobbi. I love Roberto's work. I have every single thing he's ever written. The new books that he's putting out, which you read a page a day and you learn the thing on those pages. They're brilliant. And this is kind of the book that started it for me because I was looking for stand-up magic. And the way that he talks about doing stand-up card magic is it's now it seems obvious, but if you haven't done it, how to elevate a card trick from the close-up environment into the stand-up environment and the way that you should, it's kind of like 5 points in magic. This is the crossover from 5 points in magic to being a card magician on stage. And it's something that I do. And so this is just full of so much. By the way, you can tell I almost always read on the toilet because
It's
this
the toilet
toilet
paper.
paper is a bookmark in this book. So I really do. I always take a book to the bathroom with me.
Sensational.
Although actually I've noticed this one's a napkin from taking a TUI flight. So I took this on a plane at some point. But yeah, it's just a brilliant book and I recommend it. And actually I performed at the session and I did a card routine, a stage card routine of mine. And afterwards, Roberto Giobbi told me that he'd really enjoyed it. And so that was like, I felt like being anointed, I said, is it okay if I hug you? So yeah, it's pretty cool. So stand-up card magic. If you're a card magician, buy everything he's ever written. But if you want to move your card magic stage, there's no better book than this. Really, really, there isn't. I only have two left, and one of them is my favorite. Arguably, they're both my favorites. But the second to last one I'm going to hold up is this. It is Magic Shows by Ian Keeble. And I love books that tell you the set lists of other magicians from the past. And there's a one that I have called Programs of Magicians, which is magicians from the 1920s and, before that, which is brilliant. I got it as a PDF from eLibrary or somewhere like that because it's not in print. I don't even know if it was ever really in print, but it's terrific. And this one kind of does that as well. So if I show you inside, it's basically just he talks about the magician and then shows you all of the things that were in the show and shows you promo that he collected on the day. But it's basically just the set lists, and then he describes little things about the. Oh, there we go. We got a little napkin fall out of there as well. Describes little things about it. So there's Ricky Jay and his 52 assistants. There's a picture from it, and then he literally describes piece by piece what was in the show. And for me, I just find these books really inspiring just to see what other magicians have done and how they've structured the show. And I look at the set lists and I think, even would I have done it in that order? You know, what was the benefit of that order and not a different one? And I just think you can learn so much. This book is really hard to get now, I think, but it's called Magic Shows, and it literally, that is all it is. It's great. I wish there were more books like this because they're some of my favorites.
I was going to say, as somebody moving into sort of magic consulting, those kind of books, so useful just to see other people's thinking on how they're structuring what they're doing and what they're putting in different places. Would also be incredibly interesting to take a look at that book and put it into a spreadsheet and see where the crossover is of what tricks are sort of coming up the most, where they're being put in, what people are finishing with. I think would be an interesting piece of information to look at.
There's a tiny bit of that in the book, actually, because if he sees, you know, Paul Daniels or Wayne Dobson or someone quite famous over multiple years, he will say, you know, Paul Daniels, 6-card repeat, as in blah, blah, blah. So you can see which tricks are repeated. And you can also see which ones he got taken out and which ones he kept on with over and over again. That's very interesting as well. So yeah.
I have to grab that.
Yeah, if you can get it, you should get it. It's tough to get, but it's really good. And then my last one is a monster, but this is my hero. This is my number one. I mean, Robert Houdin is up there as my number one, but Robert Houdin is kind of inaccessible via both history, because there's not really anything that, you know, you can't see Robert Houdin perform. And also he performed in French, so that's got a thing. And I can speak French a little bit. Je ne parle pas très bien français, but I still can't connect quite with Robert Houdin in the same way as I can with this next person, even though this is another magician who was dead before I was born, and it is Roy Benson. This book here, Benson by Starlight, written by Levent, and
thick.
And yeah, thick, and Todd Carr for the Miracle Factory is just great. And the thing about this book that's insane is that there's the reason it's so thick is that he says Benson was inspired here by Nate Leipzig. And then there's 5 chapters where they describe the entirety of Nate Leipzig's act. And then, you know, he was inspired by Di Vernon's Harlequin act. And then they describe all of Di Vernon's Harlequin act. So it's kind of great. And there's loads of stuff in here where I've never seen these pictures before. So this is a photograph. Roy Benson had this routine that was, sorry if the paper is shuffling on the microphone. Roy Benson had this routine where he was pretending that he was at his psychiatrist's, and he laid on the ground with the microphone. You can see that beautiful old-fashioned microphone. And he would lie on the ground and talk to the audience laid on his side, and he would say, "But I'm fine now." You know, that was like a recurring thing. He would moan about something and say, "But I'm fine now." And it became a running joke. And it's one thing to say, "Oh, that seems quite fun and postmodern," but Benson was performing in vaudeville. You know, Benson was famous at the turn of vaudeville into the movie era. So to think of it being postmodern now, it's crazy to think that he was doing this 100 years ago, just so ahead of his time. And there are loads of just beautiful pictures here of Benson performing billiard balls and, you know, torn restored newspaper and just loads and loads of different things. And I just think it's such a beautiful peek into a different era. It talks about Benson. I'm just going to flick and see if I can spot any really nice pictures. It talks about him being in movies and stuff. It describes his whole billiard ball routine, which I do as well. And of course, Roy Benson kind of reinvented the billiard balls, because when it was first invented by Boutier de Colter, he did it with the balls in front of his body like this, which almost nobody does it that way anymore. Rune Clan does it, and a couple of other people do it in that traditional, original style. But when Roy Benson came along, he did that thing you just said, where he turned the hand into a display, and then this hand would produce the balls, and this one would display them. But it hadn't been like that before. And so Benson came along and turned it into that, and then he taught it to Alan Wakeling, and Alan Wakeling took it forward. And I mean, the Wakeling book, I could have brought that out here too, because that's brilliant. But and Wakeling did an Any Drink Called For kind of routine too, so there's a bit of crossover there. But I just think it's brilliant. It's, again, another book that's hard to get, and it's thick. I love this book so much, by the way. I've taken this in my hand luggage on at least 20 cruises. I mean, you've got to be a psychopath.
You are paying extra money for hand luggage just to put that in.
because I like having it with me because I know every time I open it, I just see something that I never saw before. And there's like original. Benson was writing a book himself or some lecture notes, and Levent managed to get the notes. And so they're all in here too, like every single thing. It's just so comprehensive. It's got a Roy Benson routine for the sucker die box in it. You know, it's like there's just not things you would expect to see. And so I think actually the way that I'm gushing, although it may be slightly embarrassing, shows the enthusiasm that I
Yeah,
have for this performer and for this book, and I would never apologize for it because this is one of those books that can make you fall in love with magic again. And so again, that's my number one. This is my put on a pedestal number one greatest book ever written in magic. That's my quickfire answer.
boom, super quick.
I put the book down so heavy, I just brutalized the
Knocked the
camera.
entire camera. Yeah, I mean, I get the feeling I'm going to be spending a lot of money on books as more and more guests bring up these incredible things, especially the stuff that's hard to get hold of. Going
Yeah,
to be paying a pretty penny for those, but the magic shows one sounds phenomenal.
yeah,
I've
it's
done
great.
all of the other ones, but I think the Benson book. I've barely got space in my room as is, but with the size of that, I'd have to put my bed on top of it.
Yeah, you
Like
just sleep
it's
on it.
it's absurd. Obviously, you've mentioned some phenomenal performers there,
Hmm.
but if I was to ask you if there's a particular performance that stands out in mind for you, is there any one in particular or any one act in particular that you think that is it? That's my favorite performance.
This is the question that I think I struggled with the most because if I was taking a whole performance, I think Darren Brown's Enigma is pretty.
I am
It's about as
perfect.
close to perfect because that ending with McFly and all of that sort of stuff is great. The fact that he has the balls to mess up the first trick, you know, and he can get the first revelation wrong, but know that he's got enough currency with the audience to carry it off.
Yeah,
Um, I think that the routine that he does where the the story about the medallion and the every time he says it, when he says that line about and my granddad had inscribed 7 words, they said, Darren, I told you not to look. I
yeah,
get just this
goosebumps.
this
Yeah,
thing. And you just the storytelling quality is I mean, it's incomparable. He's incredible. So that for me is about as close to a great performance as I could ever wish to see. Lance Burton for me, you know, is a really, really good. Or Lance Burton is like the kind of place I wish that I could get to because he's someone who is really humble and connects with an audience and gets a kid on stage and does a really funny 10 minutes, but then he can also present an illusion, but then he's got that amazing, you know, FISM award winning act where he's doing candles and doves and all that
yeah,
sort of stuff. And it's kind of interesting when you look at that act and you see it from the very beginning. Lance was really quite gothic, you know, he was a lot closer in his makeup style and everything to a sort of Dan Sperry than he was to a Johnny Thompson, but you know he transitioned across time and he became very classical and almost light. But in the beginning, he was quite grungy, even though he was wearing a tail suit. So I like seeing the evolution of that across time. Lance Burton did one of the best Any Drink Called For routines out there. He has a really good multiplying bottles that he got this track made for, and he has this Frank Sinatra, you know, voice on it and stuff. It's just fantastic. There are a bunch of things I could pick out from Lance Burton that I think are terrific. I really like David Kaplan. The Great Kaplan is one of my favorites. His act is great. There's a guy who nobody's really heard of in the UK, and he keeps himself to LA basically, but he's brilliant and sort of quite similar to me in style a little bit. But he's called David Kovac, and he's fantastic and really, really funny. I saw him host in the Palace at the Magic Castle on a week that I was there, and I said to my friend Taylor, that's the best funniest guy I've ever seen in my life. And I became friends with him, you know, and hung out in the week and stuff. He's great. Um, I don't know. If I was picking a single show, one whole performance that I would say every single person needs to see how good magical effects combined with storytelling could be, it would have to be Enigma. It's just and it still feels modern. You know,
yeah.
it's quite time moves quickly, and Enigma is quite old now already, but it still feels really modern. But then it also feels like it could be from the 1920s too. Darren straddles that timeless thing really, really well.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think with it being so ahead of its time back then, is
Yeah,
why it still feels like it works now. Because Darren's been ahead of the curve for a long time. Well, Darren and his team. He's got an
yeah.
incredible production team and consultants and stuff as well. And
I think it's
as you
probably the
mentioned,
best we've ever had in terms of
yeah,
mystery genre performers. He's the best.
I think it's why he has that level of notoriety and being able to pull it off both on stage and on TV and still
Yeah,
get that storytelling and everything across is crazy to see.
yeah. He's the one. He's the one.
This next question, I rejigged the order of the quickfire questions because in our first episode with Michael Murray, I had this one last. And
Okay.
it was like positivity, 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 bam,
Are we only on
negativity.
3?
We are on to
This is
magic
number 4.
industry gripe. Yeah. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. We're 5 in. We're good.
Okay.
We're fine. Quickfire, 35 minutes in. This is your magic industry gripe. Obviously, magicians love drama. There's a lot of things that I personally don't think belong in the industry. Things like ego. Michael Murray mentioned piracy. What if you had to highlight one thing is your magic industry gripe? This could be a topic like that, or it could be something that you think is overperformed, or
I think just everyone getting a bit too upset with kind of asking for permission and crediting. I think there's a bit of for me, if anybody wants to use anything that I've ever released, put out, something I've said on a Penguin lecture, if you've taken it and, moved it forward, or a Vanishing Ink thing, or one of my DVDs, or anything I've ever put out into the world, if you want to use it in your lectures or in your, release, just do it. But just mention it was mine. This whole thing about having to track down the original. Do you mind if I use this thing? And then they say no, and then we're just halted. Like,
okay. Yeah.
other industries don't really work like that. I think just do the thing and say, this is based on the work of so and so. Go check them out. I think that but also, as you can see from this chat so far, I'm not afraid of highlighting my influences. I think it's important. We all love that phrase that magic is built on the shoulders of giants. But then if you get any form of praise, you want to pretend that you were just that tall on your own. Like, just tell people where you got the idea from. Tell people none of it matters in the real world. Nobody cares. We're such a small industry to be falling out with each other over nothing. Like, if you see someone do something and it's really cool, obviously there has to be a distance between the thing that they did and the thing that you're doing. There's obviously that
If there's not a
comparison
progression, there's just stealing.
there's got to be some progression, or you've got to have used it in a different way or something. If you rip someone off and you go, oh, but yeah, you were using blue cards and these are red, so it's very clearly different, that's obviously ridiculous. But I also think that everybody instinctively, unless they're an idiot, knows where that line is. If you're taking a move and using it in a completely different context, or I just think we get so upset about a thing that doesn't matter. If you put a trick out into the world, and these days, if you put a trick out in the world and someone else uses part of your trick a year later, your trick's done anyway. It was a year ago. The release cycle of magic now is such that if you put out a thing and people don't see it in the first 4 months, they will never see it. And if someone else puts out a release that uses a part of your thing and you go, oh, well, you ripped off my thing, people would have bought my thing, people would have never even heard about your thing. Just get over it. Honestly, it makes no difference. Put your thing out, make a little bit of money, take your 40% of retail or whatever it is, do it at your lectures, sell as many as you can, just keep doing your act and come up with something else. Like, we just get so het up on that. And I honestly think it doesn't matter. And, people are obviously free to feel completely differently to that. But I'll say out loud now, if anybody has anything of mine they want to use, that's easy to say, by the way, when you haven't invented loads of absolutely brilliant stuff. But use it. One of the people I admire most in this world is a guy called Tom Lehrer. And Tom Lehrer is a lyricist and composer, and he sings all of these really, really funny songs. And he was mega famous in the 50s and 60s. And he has these songs. I use them in my pre-show quite a lot because they're kind of piano and singing. He was basically the original Tim Minchin. It's the best way to describe him. So if you know Tim Minchin or Bo Burnham or any of those people, Tom Lehrer was where it started. And he has a song called I Hold Your Hand in Mine. And it's like a romance, and he's talking about holding his wife's hand forever. But you don't realize until the end of the song that he's singing about the fact that he killed her and the hand is the only part he has left. So he's driving around and we've only got the hand. It's really funny. And so I play it in my pre-show and people are like, oh, this is nice. And they don't always hear the twist
The
when you get the
last.
bit. Or there's a really funny song called Poisoning Pigeons in the Park. And it's about how his hobby is going out on a Sunday and, feeding pigeons poison food. And it's like all of his songs are like that. They're really offbeat. There's one called The Masochism Tango, and they're just really, really funny and kind spirited. And he was a brilliant performer as well. But he also made all of his music completely rights and royalty free while he was alive. If you want to make a musical, if you want to use it in your show, if you want to put it on TV, just do it. I don't care. Because he was able to create something brilliant, but then not want to be the only one to hold it forever. I think there's a lot to admire about that because letting things go allows you to move forward as well. In fact, tonight, as we record this, taking that inspiration, I'm releasing the entirety of a show that I did in 2020. And I sat on it for ages and it's recorded really nicely. It's multi-camera. It was at the Chicago Magic Lounge. The show is 40 minutes long. And I put out tiny bits of the show, but I kind of didn't want people to see the rest of it. And I thought, there's that line, I can't remember who it says about magicians are guarding an empty safe. And I thought, if magicians are guarding an empty safe, I'm not even guarding a safe. I'm guarding a pile of nothing. Just put it out there and let people see it. And if it makes a difference, it makes a difference. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So my gripe is how protective people are over tiny things that don't matter. And they wouldn't have thought of them anyway if it wasn't for the fact that a million people before them pushed them down that path. Just move on. That's my gripe.
It halts the industry. I
It
think
does.
allowing people to take inspiration from what you've done, and as you say, providing there is some sort of progression and they move with it and they help move the industry forward, then as you say, I don't think it's ever a bad thing. But if somebody's just stealing something for the sake of it and not crediting, then
I don't think anybody ever gets disproportional credit in magic either, because magic is so self-policing, and there are enough people who know better and know everything that it's not like anybody ever ripped anybody off. And then the world went, "Wow, I can't believe you thought of this amazing thing. What was that? You didn't know. You didn't think of anything to do with that. This guy's a genius." That literally never happens.
no.
If someone puts something out that references your thing, it nearly always only ever shines more light on you, and you get credit from people who never would have heard of your thing. I just think it's not the big deal we all make it out to be. People get pilloried in magic because they want to push forward and put more and more and more things out, and I don't see it as being a big problem. The best example of this, of course, recently is Craig Petty is nearly always involved with drama and nearly always releasing videos where he's explaining why he was right or why he was wrong and all that sort of stuff. And I think Craig's approach to magic is a bit like that of the professional wrestler. Sometimes I think that he recognizes that drama is helpful and he doesn't mind because he's got broad enough shoulders to not really care. And I respect that about him. But also, he is a brilliant inventor and he does think of loads of brilliant stuff. And he doesn't let that hold him back from doing it. And every now and again, he gets caught out in, an apologetic or, way that he might be embarrassed about. But I think that the total sum of what he's added is so much bigger than the total sum of what
100%.
people would say he's taken away. And in that respect, you cannot help but say a person like that is a positive force in magic. And without them, magic would be worse off. So I'd rather you just keep going, just keep putting stuff out. And if it treads on someone's toes a little bit, who cares? Just get on with it.
I agree. Perfect. Well, we've stooped into that little bit of negativity. We're going to quickly hop back to some positivity before we get into the main crux of the interview with our final quickfire question. 45 minutes in. This quickfire question, I fear...
What else are we here for?
Exactly.
Stuff, right?
Exactly. I knew this would be the case. The second I get talking about magic, and I know yourself, the second you get talking about magic, it just rolls. But this question, I feel, has the most potential for being a massive, expansive question, and it is, who are your main influences? Obviously, you've mentioned a few so far, but are there like 4 or 5 in particular that you'd like to highlight?
I should have really thought about this maybe a little bit more, actually. Because the only question when I read the questions, the only thing that really jumped out to me was, oh, I'll grab some books. I'll just look on the bookshelves and pick out some books. But my influences, of course, Lance Burton, Matt King, David Kaplan, David Kovac, David Williamson, um, Johnny Thompson.
Bear in mind, whatever you say here gets put on a social media post, and
Okay.
it's square.
Penn and Teller, Wayne Dobson, Paul Daniels, Jeffrey Durham. God, there are so many, aren't there? Roberto Giobbi, like these people, Darren Brown, these people that I mentioned. I really like sort of outside arts as well. I really like Raymond Crowe because he straddles a bunch of different worlds and does, hand shadows and things like that. So I love that sort of thing. I like Avner the Eccentric is a real favorite of mine, who's kind of a clown. I loved Rob Torres, who's sadly no longer with us. My friend Taylor, is my most consistent, Taylor Hughes, my most consistent daily inspiration. We talk every single day and chat about ideas. All of the people who I'm lucky enough to have as friends in magic and talk to all the time, they certainly are influences to me. These people from history, Di Vernon and Roy Benson and Robert Houdin, Thurston, Keller, Carter. I really like magicians who do kind of manipulation style. I like sleight heavy.
Yeah.
I like when a lot of magic happens. Someone like Charlie Caper, who doesn't say, "Oh, I need a pen. Here's a pen." Says, "I need a pen." Boom, pen. It's like someone who seems magic and everything they do has magic dribbled throughout it. I like those kind of performers. Magic doesn't have to be things appearing all the time. It can be magic that's achieved through connection with a person, or a running line of jokes, or there's loads of different ways to achieve the feeling of magic. Years ago I went to see a panto in Birmingham, and Paul Zerdin, the ventriloquist, and I love ventriloquists as well. Paul Zerdin, in fact, I've got a bodiless puppet there on the back wall. Which I do a bit with in my show about how the case that the body came in and the case the head travel in. The case where the body was lost, but he doesn't know it yet. So I bring out the puppet on a stick, and then halfway through, he realizes that the body isn't there, and this kind of thing from that. So I saw Paul Zerdin in a panto, and I don't think anybody knew at this point that he had a puppet that was remote controlled, animatronic. Nobody had ever really seen those. And so he has this argument with the puppet, which is fairly, standard ventriloquism trope. And then he says, "Well, fine, you can stay out here on your own. If you don't need me, you stay here." And he walks off stage. And in a panto at the Birmingham Hippodrome, the pace is unbelievable. It's got to be 10 jokes a minute, or it's dead. The pace, you obviously live in Newcastle. You've seen Clive and Danny, do their panto bunch, and the pace is relentless. And in this moment in the panto, he walks off, and the puppet sits there for like 50 seconds to a minute, which in panto world is 2.5 hours. It's honestly unbearable. But the belief in that moment was incredible. And so I'm watching this show, and the puppet is, and I know what's going to happen. But I'm sitting there, and the silence, and it's funny, and then it stops being funny, and then it becomes a little bit funny, and then it stops being funny, and then it becomes really funny, and then all of a sudden, after like a minute, as the audience are laughing, Sam, the little boy puppet, looks up and says, "What are you laughing at?" And the gasp from the audience was, I immediately started crying. I don't even mind telling you. I literally, tears down my face, so emotional, because I've seen 100 magic shows in my life, and I've watched 100 video, thousands of videos, and I've read every book, and I've done a million shows, but I've never had a thing where I felt as strong a moment of magic outside of, watching E.T. when I was a kid than I did in that moment. It was just incredible. So it doesn't always have to be magic tricks to feel like magic, to get that sense that magic has happened. But I like performers who do that. I like performers that have a lot of bits and do a lot of stuff. Tom Peterson was a huge one for me. Again, sadly, no longer with us, but he was a really good friend of mine. And he was a really funny, an incredibly daring and bold performer who did tricks that nobody else did, which I loved about him. So he was a big influence on me. There are just so many. Mike Caveney, I love. It's just, honestly, the list genuinely could be endless, but they would be my top ones. Yeah. If I had to choose a single person, I would choose Roy Benson, because I love his continual line of patter while doing difficult sleight of hand magic tricks, and I kind of model myself on that idea in my own show. So my biggest influence would be Roy Benson, and everyone else comes after that.
I think what you perfectly highlighted there, though, with such an extensive list, is influence and inspiration can come from literally anything. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be magic, it doesn't have to be magicians. You could be sat watching the TV and you could be watching a nature documentary of all things, and you could see a tiny little thing that just sparks that bit of creativity that then
Yeah.
turns into something monumental. So, as you highlighted perfectly there, I think influence is it can be found anywhere. Same with magic. The feeling of magic can be found in anything as well.
Oh yeah, if you've got your eyes open, for me, a huge one now is I love black and white films. I love Universal monster films, and I love. There's a really funny thing when you really like old movies, you watch. Say you watch Alfred Hitchcock. We all know that thing where, say, the character's in the center of the frame like this, and we see that thing where the background appears to close in around them. Like
Yeah.
the background zooms in and they stay exactly where they are, but somehow the background moves around them. And it's achieved by physically moving the camera forwards whilst also zooming the camera out. So the camera moves forwards, but the zoom, and then you can also do it the opposite way, where you move the camera backwards and you physically zoom it in at the same time.
Yeah.
And it creates this perspective shift where the background moves around the performer, but the performer stays right where they are. And Alfred Hitchcock invented that shot, and it first appears in Vertigo. And you watch that film and you see that thing, and you can look and say, oh, I've seen this shot in a bunch of films. But when you watch older films, you can say that shot is never present. So when you watch a Universal horror movie, which of course, they're over 100 years
Yeah.
old, when you watch those movies, the ability that those people had to tell stories without those tools, I really love seeing how performers achieved theatricality and drama and storytelling. But also, if you go back far enough, you can see the points where someone came in and created a storytelling tool that other people used afterwards.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same in magic as it is in movies. That shot is used all the time after Alfred Hitchcock invented it. And there's loads of other stuff like that too, where they still were able to do a good job, but it changes over time because tools get invented. So, yeah, there's inspiration everywhere. And also, if you look into other industries, you can see how they use things differently, I guess. I don't know. I got a bit lost in my point there. I was just thinking at the end about how, we listen to Beethoven now,
Yeah.
and you hear Beethoven played on a piano, but when Beethoven wrote that music, the piano didn't exist, and he wrote it on a harpsichord, or, like other. It's interesting now. Just everything is growing all the time, and there's inspiration everywhere, but also the same stories in magic exist in every other industry.
Yeah.
That's a way to close that point.
We've gotten to know you in such a short space of time. I say short space of time very loosely, but obviously we don't know what your background is. You obviously have a background in comedy and magic, and that's where this has whole come to. But why did you pick comedy magic, and what is your origin story? Where did this come from?
So, you hear that beeping there?
Yeah.
That's the sound of a speed camera alerter that's being charged on the desk. For those that are wondering what that strange chirping was, that was unpredictable.
I didn't even know
So,
that was a thing. That's
my
cool.
background, when I was a kid, I think I was funny as a kid, to some degree, but my dad used to run bingo halls. I'm from the Northeast originally, and my dad ran a bunch of bingo halls in the Northeast. So when I was a little kid, I would always get on stage in those when it was closed. Sunday afternoons, I would go with my dad, and the bingo hall would be closed, and I would love to get on the mic and hear my voice on the mic and shout and sing and all of that. And I think that kind of started it off. I went to drama school, but an informal weekend drama school. But we did shows at the Sunderland Empire, which is a big theatre in the Northeast, and I was in that sort of stuff. And then I started learning music, and I became a musician. I played piano and guitar and bass and drums and all of those things. And then when I was 16, I was in a band, and we performed in clubs and pubs and all sorts of things like that. And eventually I was in college, in performing arts college in the Northeast. And one day, this girl that I was, in love with basically came and sat next to me and my friend. There used to be a magazine called the New Musical Express. I don't know if it's still around, the NME. And my
Oh
college used
yeah.
to get it in for free. They would buy it and put it in the library. And my friend and I would go to the library, and he would sit and read it, and I would sit and twiddle my thumbs. Now, bear in mind, this is in the early 2000s. So you didn't have Facebook or Instagram, or, you had a phone, but it didn't it couldn't get on the internet. My original phone, there's no internet. So when you would go in somewhere to sit, you would literally just sit. You weren't just always staring at your phone. So we would go in the library and he would read the enemy. And then this girl that I knew came in and she sat right next to us. And she was auditioning to go and be what at the time they called a fun star at Haven, like a red coat on holiday parks. And so she said, I'm going to go and audition for this place on Sunday. Do either of you two want to come with me? I've never driven this far before. I've only just passed my test. And my friend Mark said, oh, I can't. He had a gig himself and I was free and in love with this girl. So I said, yeah, I'll go. Absolutely. And she said, oh, if you're coming, will you play the guitar for me? And I said, yeah. So we turned up to the audition. I played the Cause version of Everybody Hurts, and she sang the REM song. And then when she got up and went back, the guy who's doing the audition said, are you auditioning as well? And I said, well, I only came to play the guitar for her. And he said, well, you're sitting there now. You might as well. So I played Breakfast at Tiffany's by Deep Blue Something. And 2 weeks later, we both got a letter and she didn't get the job and I did. And so I was, out of nowhere. And I said to my parents, because we'd been on holiday to these places when I was a kid, I said, oh, I've had this job and, I think I'm going to go and do it. So I did. I left college early and I went in February and went to training and then I started the job. And it was really only then that I saw magicians because I'd liked magic as a kid and I watched Paul Daniels and Wayne Dobson on TV and I knew how to do a double lift. I had this friend at drama school that liked magic a lot and he taught me a few card sleights so I could do. It was the same time that David Blaine came around on TV and he would do that it was the first person I ever saw do what I know is a Simon Lovell trick where, someone chooses a card, it's shuffled in the deck, you show them the incorrect card, you turn over the double, you put it on their hand, they put their finger on it, and then when they turn it over, it's the correct card. So I'd seen David Blaine do that on TV. I recognized that I could do that trick with this one slight, I knew a false shuffle and that double lift. And so I could do that. And I did it all the time. And because I could do that, I was suddenly now was this kid who was a magician, but I only knew how to do two things. And then I went off to Haven and I would do sound and lights for other acts. And once or twice a week, those acts would be magicians. And they were people like, Dave Burns, who had an act called Atmosphere, Paul DeBeck, who was the same age as me, but he was already touring around because he'd been in IBM competitions and all that since he was a kid. And he was a great magician already, even though he's only 18. And he now lives in Vegas and he's got this brilliant show called London Calling. It's at festivals and he's been in, Mad Apple and Cirque du Soleil shows and all sorts. He's fantastic. So I became friends with him. And then there were other acts as well that I would see touring around, Martin James, John Danbury, British magicians that were performing at holiday parks at the time. And I would always think, I wonder if I could do something like that. But at the time, I still thought I was going to be a singer. I couldn't sing, by the way, but I could play guitar and other instruments. And I was singing in a band. And I was also singing in the show team on the holiday park. But back then, the standards were not, the standards are very high now. And they only take, a good level of singer. But back then you just had to want to do it rather than, be any good at it. So I was the singer and I thought I would do that. And I genuinely believed that I was going to be this singer. I've never told the story before, actually, in this way. I thought I was going to be this singer that did like impressions. And I had this variety thing that I always wanted to do. And I remember sketching this poster on paper and it was me. But I had like a cape, like a Freddie Mercury cape, and this Elvis jumpsuit, like half and half. And then I had this thing on my head here and something else. And the poster was supposed to suggest that I would be all of these characters because I'd heard about the Legend show in Blackpool where they had impersonators do that. And I thought, what if I could do all of that? And I wasn't even remotely talented enough to do any of it in any conceivable way. But then fortune and fate kind of got in the way one day. So I'd been living in Blackpool for a whole year. The holiday park that I was at was in Blackpool. And not once had I ever visited a magic shop in that whole time. Magic had gone completely out of my mind. And then when I was 19, I was back in Blackpool and my girlfriend at the time, who was on the team with me, she had a big fallout with the entertainment manager. The two of them were friends and they'd had and she just went in the middle of the night. She literally called her dad. She took all of her stuff and she left. And the next morning I had to go into work and say, oh, she's gone. That's it. We're done. We were still together, but she's left the park. And so that was quite created quite a hot situation for me in that there was a lot of tension that I was going out with her, but she left us in the lurch and the manager was putting a lot of it on me. And I realized I was getting into an untenable situation. So I called up the head office and I said, I need to transfer to a different park. Things are getting pretty difficult here. And also I was thinking, if I go to another park, I can maybe get her a job on the bar or in a different department at another place. So I got a transfer and I went to a place up in the Lake District and I got my girlfriend a job straight on that park. And in the first week of being at this place, the people I'd become friends with said, oh, we're going to go on a day trip to Blackpool. Do you want to come on your day off? And I said, yeah, brilliant. So we took this drive and we drove down what I now know is called the Yeadon Way. We came into Blackpool via the South Shore entrance. We drove down this road called Lytham Road. And as we were driving, the security guy said, oh, there's a magic shop there. I wonder if they sell fancy dress, because there was this fancy dress party coming up at the next weekend. So we got out of the car and we went into the shop and it was JB Magic. And I walked in there and Mark Mason was behind the counter and Mark showed us tricks. And immediately I was like, just in love with it all over again. I saw these close-up magic tricks and I saw the way Mark demonstrated the tricks and it blew my mind. And I remember I had £150 left in the whole world and I spent all of it on magic. And I also borrowed money from my friend, Joanne, and bought even more stuff. And I still remember I bought Missing Spade, the banner where you drop down and it's like a 3 of spades. And the audience, it's a roll, for those who don't know, it's like a tight rolled up banner and it drops down and it's 3 spades. And the person has chosen a 4 of spades. And then you pull a full, spade out from behind, like I don't know what it's called, the company that made them, but it rolled up into a thing like the appearing pole kind of thing. So I pulled one of those out and I bought the dream bag where, you have an empty bag and you pull out the boxes of flowers. And I bought a newspaper seance gimmick where you could hold a newspaper and you had a fake hand. It never worked. It was terrible. I bought a milk pitcher, where you pour the milk and the milk does the thing. All of this stuff. I bought all these tricks and I went back to the holiday park and I didn't know that you were supposed to practice. I thought if you could do the thing, you just did the thing. So every night I went on stage, and remember in these holiday parks, the guests are Monday to Friday and then Friday to Monday. So you see different people twice a week. So Monday I would go out and present on for half an hour. I could do whatever I wanted and I would do one of these tricks. And then Tuesday I did another one, and then Wednesday another one, Thursday another one. Then on Friday I did the one from Monday again. So within 3-4 weeks, I had experience of doing these tricks on stage 5, 6, 7 times, and they were getting good quite quickly. And also they were getting good in quite a difficult environment. So I would order stuff from the catalog from JB Magic. I still have the catalog now, and I look at it and it gives me butterflies in my stomach when I look at these line drawings of tricks again in this catalog. I honestly feel a little bit excited sick, because it reminds me of being 19 again and how excited I was to own all of the stuff. So I kind of just ordered everything. Every time I got paid, I would buy more stuff. And at the end of the season, this company that had been touring had been watching me present all the time, and they had a contract at a place called Ribby Hall, and they needed someone to come in and basically run the team and present every night. And I got offered the job, but there was no daytime duties, and I could make up the whole program myself. Everything that was on, I got to decide. So I took the job, and it turned out it was basically back in Blackpool. So now I have 2 choices. I can live where this gig is, or I can go and live in Blackpool, where I'm a minute from the magic shop every day and have to get the train to work every night. And like a crazy person, I took that option. So I lived a minute away from JB Magic, and every single day I went to JB Magic and I stood in there for 2 and 3 hours and I watched Mark demonstrate every trick 1,000 times, and I bought everything I could afford, and I did all of this stuff. And then I would get the train and I would perform the tricks that I'd bought. So one day, as it turns out, Mark is in there by himself, apart from me as well, obviously. And some customers come in, and Mark's in the back gluing stuff. And those who don't know Mark Mason, I mean, you must have been sleeping under a rock, but he's one of the best creators and producers of magic that we've ever had in magic, and certainly the best demonstrator. Paul Richards is great as well, from what used to be Elmwood, but Mark is the best, as close to Ken Brook as we have in the modern age. And so he's in the back gluing some stuff and making it, and I'm in the back talking to him, and he sees some customers come in, and he said, oh, do you mind just going to help them out? And I said, well, I mean, I don't work here. I don't, he said, you're in here more than the other staff. You go out there and just, you'll be fine. So I go behind the counter, I help him out, I show him some tricks. I say to Mark, everyone's finished. We need you to come and ring it up. He comes behind the counter. there's £400 worth of products on the table. And what had happened was my enthusiasm, which is spilling out again now, my enthusiasm for magic back then had rubbed off on these people, and they'd bought everything I showed them. So they left, and Mark said, do you want to come back tomorrow? And I said, well, I am coming back tomorrow. And he said, no, do you want to come back tomorrow?
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, stand on this side of the counter. And I said, oh, yeah, brilliant. So then Mark and I worked out a deal. And then I was working at JB Magic, and I would work there during the day, and then I would go and do my other thing on a night. So I had two jobs at the same time. And eventually I heard about this opportunity to do shows in hotels along the front in Blackpool. So I left my other gig, but I stayed working at JB Magic. And then once, twice, three times a week, I would do shows. But the great thing about Blackpool is that a lot of the hotels, they have this turnover where acts will do multiple shows. So a singer will do a show at 7, and then a completely different place at 8:30, then another place at 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And I got into that circuit. So I was working at JB Magic Monday to Saturday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, I was doing sometimes 3 and 4 shows a night every single week. So I was doing 10, 12 shows a week sometimes, and working in a magic shop during the day. So I just had this kind of, I don't really know how to describe it, like this Sonic the Hedgehog thing of like getting the, I just sped through it. And I managed to pick up in a year kind of 10 years of experience of magic, because Mark Mason was teaching me stuff every day. And every night I was taking a book from the shop and I was reading it, or a DVD, and I was watching it, and products would come in and I was demonstrating them, and magicians would come in and they would teach me stuff, and I would learn from them and listen. And then I was trying it out every night. And so by the time that had gone on for a reasonable amount of time, I had all this material, and that, as they say, is history, I guess, because next thing I start to get offered holiday parks now as an act, and then fly out gigs to holiday resorts in Turkey and Egypt. And then next thing is cruise ships. And then one day, Wayne Dobson used to call the shop all the time, and I would talk to him on the phone all the time. And he said the Blackpool Magic Convention was coming up, and Mark obviously didn't need anybody to demonstrate on his stand, because if a magician from Germany walks up to Mark Mason's stand and I demonstrate a trick to him, they're going to say, get out of here, kid. I don't want to see you. I want to see the man. So Mark didn't need me at all. But Wayne did, because Wayne, as everyone knows, has got MS. And so he was at this point where he was still very vocal and all of that. It was quite at the beginning of what has taken hold of him more now. But he's still as sharp as anything, but he wasn't performing anymore. He was having a lot of difficulty with his arms, and he was basically, paralyzed at this point. And so he needed someone to demonstrate for him. And this was before Mike Sullivan was working with him, and that whole partnership that, has given Wayne this amazing ability to put out every idea he's got now is fantastic. But before all of that, I was working for him on the stand. And as luck would have it, Russ Stevens with RSVP Productions was on the stand next to us. So Russ saw me over a weekend demonstrating for magicians, making magicians laugh, really connecting with magicians in a good way, because I'd been working for Mark Mason. If you can't learn it from him, you can't learn it from anybody. So I get all this experience, and Russ says, do you have any of your own material? And I said, yeah, I got some stuff. I got some things I can do. He said, well, let's try and film a DVD. And this is when Martin Sanderson's Corporate Close-Up and Sean McCree and all of those guys were just having these close-up DVDs. And that was kind of taking off like 2008, 2009. So I made a DVD called Supercharged Classics, and it came out and people liked it. And I started lecturing, and then I started getting booked for conventions, but doing stage as well at the conventions. And then the kind of real turning point was that I did the IBM in Southport, but Michael Finney was on the bill, and Michael Finney was a big hero to me, and he really took a shine to me, and we got on very well. And he recommended me to the Magic Castle, and a couple of other people in LA at that time had seen my DVD, a guy called Farrell Dillon, who's great, and that kind of helped it out. And then once I booked the Magic Castle, I did the Magic Castle, lectured at Blackpool Magic Convention, and recorded my first Penguin Live lecture all in the same 10 days, like in 2016. And I just look back to that point. That was when everything exploded for me opportunity-wise, because I literally went into the Magic Castle. Then I flew home with my wife and lectured at Blackpool. And then on the Monday, I immediately flew back to Ohio by myself and recorded Penguin Live on the Tuesday night. And so it was a 10-day period And all of those things getting out into the world, like, oh, this guy's done the castle. Oh, we saw him lecture at Blackpool. Oh, he's got a Penguin Live out. All of those things just happening at once put me on this map where suddenly booking the House of Cards or the Chicago Magic Lounge or getting back to the castle or all of that stuff started to become easy. I heard Piff say on a podcast years ago with someone else that America's like a magnifier, that every time you go there and you come back a little bit bigger. You come back with a little bit more profile or something. And I feel like that's been a thing I've tried to follow. And I find that every time I go there, people notice that and they think it separates you a little bit in some ways. So that's basically how I got to this point that it is now. And that is my entire life story from college to the guy that you're now interviewing.
It's, again, like all of the stories and everything you say just doesn't seem real. Like everything just sort of seems to fall perfectly into place and
Well, we
coincidence
take the
after
fails out, don't
coincidence.
we? There's
Oh yeah,
loads of
of course.
there's loads of times in the middle where I thought something was going to happen and it didn't. And that's happened more than anything. It got to the point where every time something good was going to happen, I would ring my parents and then tell them. And then my dad would say to me months later, what happened with that thing? And I would say, oh, it didn't happen. And I got to the point now where I actually don't tell anybody anything until I know it's happening. I always remember ringing my mum once and saying, I've been booked for a close-up magic gig in Leicester. And my mum was like, Leicester. And I said, yeah, I can't because I'm living in Blackpool. I'm like, I'm going to drive 2.5 hours to Leicester to do a magic show. Like, as if they don't have any good magicians in Leicester, they've had to bring me in. I remember feeling a really big deal. I've told everyone, what are you doing this week? I'm going to Leicester to do a magic show. Now, if anybody says to me, what are you doing? I say, I've got to go to Leicester to do a magic show. It's like, but I literally remember that, as stupid as it sounds, being like a huge deal, like 2007, 2008. I cannot believe I'm going to Leicester to do a magic show. I have made it. This is it. And so there are a lot of fails and there are always loads of things that you think are massive. And then in the fullness of time, you hope to find out that they weren't massive. Same as, people watch their old magic shows and they think, oh, I watched myself from 5 years ago. It was awful. You think, well, good. That's what you
Yeah,
want.
that's how it's supposed to
Because
be.
you watch yourself in 5 years and you go, I was brilliant back then. That means you haven't grown at all. That's, a bad sign. So you should always be looking back and thinking things you thought were big were actually smaller. That means you're growing and moving forward. But there are a lot of fails. But of course, when we tell our stories, this is I just told you 20 years there basically, and it only took me 10 to say it. But we take out a lot of stuff that turned out to be nothing, don't we? So it sounds unreal because it isn't real. But all those things happened. They just didn't happen in that perfect. And now
Yeah,
this, and now this, and now that. So yeah,
of course. You have a very unique style of performance in that even though you've taken what you do now and brought it to modern times, a lot of what you do is very classical magic, very
yeah,
vaudevillian or sideshow esque, which I think rather wrongly often gets seen as like outdated or boring.
yeah.
Why do you feel like that is a thing, and how are you going about changing what you do so that perception's not the same?
I have this argument with Andy Gladwin all the time when we talk about my art, because Andy always says this, like, about classics. He's one of that. He wants to see new stuff and all that. And I don't want to put words into Andy's mouth, but sometimes when I say to him about what do you think's holding me back, because we have these conversations,
Yeah.
but it just reminds me that he said to me, it's that you do cups and balls. Like, if you want to really go in the stratosphere, you got to stop doing tricks that are 5,000 years old. So I don't know. It's just where my love comes from. I love history. And I mean, look at the wall behind me. All of
Yeah.
those posters. Of course, this room I made specifically for doing lockdown shows. And now it's become a rehearsal space. And sometimes I still perform online. But it's kind of funny that the first thing that occurred to me to have behind me when I was doing shows was all these heroes of mine, Keller and Thurston and Newman and all those people. And, I've got a collapsible top hat right there and a case that, and look at that microphone. That's like a 1940s microphone, the old kind of style. And I think that I celebrate the fact that magic is buried in a history, and I perform these things, but I perform them in obviously quite a modern style. but I really enjoy the aesthetic of that era. And I think it's coming back around now. I think that it's about to have a new heyday. And
Yeah.
I'm really noticing that the way that my show looks, I'm getting picked up for stuff that I might not have done in the past because the world is starting to celebrate this thing,
Yeah.
this Wes Anderson aesthetic, or, the TikTok filter generation. There's kind of there's a thing now where it's having a renaissance. So maybe, I mean, it would be a real shame to get out of that game and all of a sudden everyone like, oh, they're all
Becoming
booking
the
these
thing.
1920s performers and suddenly I'm doing postmodern or something like that. But I don't know. I just love the way that era looks, and I feel like maybe I was born in the wrong era. I listen to old music. I collect vinyl records. I collect whiskey and cigars and old-fashioned things, and I just I love the way that it looks and feels. So, as far as your question, why do I think it gets looked down upon? Um, I don't know that it does actually. I'm gonna come back against the concept of the question, but I do think that you're right that there certainly has been a time when it has been looked down upon. But
Yeah.
it's only like if you took 1980s music, and said, why do you think bands who sound like 80s bands get looked down upon? Well, for a period they do, and also for a type of person they do. But there are
Yeah.
still loads of people who listen to Duran Duran every day, and they love the Reflex and they just want to hear a bit of Simple Minds or something like that. I think that it's classics. It's a bit of a trope to say, a cliche to say that classics are classics for a reason,
Yeah.
but I have a real ethos in my show that I want to break the audience's expectations, but I also don't think there's anything wrong with going via them first. I think
Yeah.
that's a strong thought. When I think back to when I saw David Blaine on television years ago, he did that thing where he had the eye drawn on his hand and he just sat there and stared at Eamon Holmes. And I remember thinking, that's such a strange thing to do. But I also know that 4 million people watch that show. So if 1% of those people like it, he might still sell 40,000 tickets on
Yeah.
tour. And because that he's got such a broad audience, you can afford to have a narrow appeal. But when you've got a narrow audience, I think you have to have a broader appeal. And I
Yeah.
think of my show as being like a funnel. So at the beginning, I'm going to walk out and I'm going to look as much like a magician as I possibly can, but I'm also going to subvert it very quickly. So in my show, I walk out with a torch to cane and I throw some fire in the air and I turn it to a cane. And then I joke, say, don't worry, this is traditional magic, not old fashioned. I'm not going to make flowers appear. And I make fake flowers appear and throw them off to the side and say, let's do a proper trick, vanishing an elephant. And I have this funny bit about vanishing elephant. So I'm doing all of these tropes and I'm showing the audience I know what it's supposed to look like, but I'm also constantly twisting it on its head because I want the audience to all make it into the funnel. And then as we move further and further through the show, the funnel can get narrower and I can show them things that they didn't expect. But when you're performing every night for 200, 300, 500, 1,000 people, you can't afford David Blaine's luxury of only 1%
Yeah.
of them liking it. So some of it is shaped out of a will to succeed every night rather than overall, because some people don't care about bombing and those people only need one killer show and they become famous.
Yeah.
But then if you do care about bombing, you want every show to go okay. That's always the balance, isn't it? You can die 9 times out of 10, but on the one night that you're brilliant, it's electric. And
Yeah.
that's the night when the producer's in from Saturday Night Live, and before you know it, you're famous. But I maybe have taken a safe route sometimes too much. If I was going to criticize myself, I don't take enough risks. And so I do a show that looks like I think a magic show is supposed to look, but hopefully I do it really well. A lot of people say to me, I get a comment a lot of times where people say, oh, that's the best multiplying bottles I've seen, or that's the best cups and balls I've seen, or whatever. It's really nice that people would say that. But the beginning of that sentence, the second part of that sentence is always trick that I've seen a million times for 100
Yeah.
years, even if it's the best version. I guess that's just the torch that I carry. I pick
Yeah.
stuff that's classic, but I think about it for longer and more than most other people. And I try to really drill it down until it's the best version. And I've just never been that guy who goes and looks at a bottle and a bottle opener on a table and thinks, oh, I've got a brilliant idea that nobody's ever done with those two things before. My inventiveness comes in staging, editing music, creating backgrounds, aesthetic, turning it into a narrative is where my thing is. So you can only do what you can do. You can only be who you are. And hopefully that the start of your question was that why is it looked down on? My answer would be, I don't know, but hopefully it's not forever.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe should have rephrased that as overlooked as opposed to looked down on. But yeah, I completely agree with everything you said, and you perfectly touched on, even though you haven't seen the questions, that perfectly segued into the next question, which is obviously one of the things that sets you apart is your use of theatrical techniques like lighting, staging, sound design.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How do you make your choices on staging your stuff to make it as streamlined and as impressive both visually and audibly to make and highlight the magic? And what impact do you think it serves?
I think that all I'm really doing is what other industries do as standard, but the magic is completely left behind. You never go and see any sort of theatrical performance that's just a person standing there talking and taking stuff out of a box and basically demonstrating it. Like a lot of magic looks like QVC, and that's not what other theatrical performances look like.
Yeah.
It's like, and look at this thing that I bought, and here's this thing that it can do, and now here's this other thing that I bought. Other theatrical genres don't do that. So I realized when I was doing pantomime, I started doing pantos in like 2013, maybe. And I remember being directed by the director of course and him asking me to assess my choices, like, why are you saying this in this way? What do you think it communicates to the audience? And me saying, that's just the way it came out. And him saying, but think, the person you are being right now is upset about this thing that just happened to them, and they're trying to get this other person to do something for them. So if that was real life, how would you handle that transition? And I realized that there was this space that exists where sometimes in magic, it's considered like beyond high art to do something that in other theatrical genres, the director turns up with his toolkit
Baseline.
on day one, and they just put this blanket of theatricality and decision making over the top of everything. And in magic, because we have this other element, it's not our fault. In other theatrical elements, they're not trying to conceal a hidden, ball in the hand while they're also saying the words. So often our decision making comes down to preserving a secret that only we have. And that secret, of course, is essential for it to be magic, because as soon as the audience not only know how it works, but as soon as they think they know how it works, and one of the ways they've decided it could work is also possible, then that might as well be how it works. So the trick's done anyway. So we not only have to conceal what we're doing, we also have to demonstrate to the audience that we're not doing any of the other things that they think we could be doing. Otherwise, there's no trick.
Yeah.
And because we're so labored, because that bag is so heavy, it's very difficult to look around and think, but I could also be doing this same thing standing over there. And maybe if I stood over there, that would affect the audience differently. And we don't realize that the impact that what we're saying has on the audience. Like if you speak very quickly, here's a thing that I've thought about quite a lot, and I'm writing a book at the minute. So this is not a plug because it's taken me forever, but I'm writing a book about about tricks. But one of the parts of it is decision making, and the decisions we can make theatrically that we don't even consider, that are also free. Because also, as soon as you think about theatricality, you think, oh, I've got to buy a backdrop and drapes and costumes and take a spotlight opera. You don't have to do any of those things. But just think, when you speak to the audience, you can speak slowly, and the way that you speak, if you speak slowly, then it becomes deliberate, and it immediately makes it sound like the thing you're saying has much greater weight to it. I've thought about this thing now that I'm saying, and I think it's really important that you understand the words that I'm saying. We can do that. But we can also speak at natural pace, which for me is more quick, or we can speak very quickly. Like if I tell you this thing really quickly, it's because I've got to get this thing done in a second, and and I've got so much to say. That completely changes everything. And then, of course, beyond the speed that you speak, it could be slow, medium, or fast. There's also the volume. So, hey, here's a secret that I got to tell you, right? And if I speak very quietly, that alters everything. So imagine now I'm doing like, hang on, I got a thing here. I'm going to open this up and see if it works. Just think about this, right? This is not going to be a great trick, but Okay, it works. So look, I reach here and I've got this, we all know what this is, of course. I got this thing. If I say to you, hey, I just found this little thing. It's like a glowing ball of light. I'm not sure what it does. Speaking like that will completely change it. If I say, I just found this, like, look what it does. It's like this, we can completely change the theatricality of a moment by just the volume and pace that we speak. And they're two things that naturally exist within our mouths. So then if we take that and we amplify it by, well, I could stand on stage, but I could also sit on the front edge of the stage, or I could go and stand on a chair in the audience, or I could stand stage left or stage right. And then based on where I'm standing, I could be in a spotlight, or I could be in full light, or I could have complete darkness, and or I could ask the audience to close their eyes. Like, I can change their vision in that way. I can have someone on stage with me, or I can have someone helping in the audience that's standing up, or they could be on stage and I could go and sit in their chair. That will change things completely. And I feel like if I was to make a table, and this is what I am doing, if I made a table that said speed, and then volume, and then position, and then lighting, and then whether or not I'm using music. And of course, music can be used throughout the whole routine as a bed, or it could be used just to highlight certain moments, or it could be used for the revelation. That's on the table as well. And so you print this thing out, right? And every time you have a trick in your show, trick one, you cross off the options that you used. And then for the second trick, you can only use 50% of those same options again. So you're like forcing theatricality into your show in a way that you never would have considered before. And I honestly believe that if you did that and you did 10 vanishes in a row, that would feel more different to the audience than if you did 10, vanish, appearance, transposition, prediction. If you did 10 completely different tricks, but every one of them is you standing in the middle of the stage, speaking at regular pace, regular volume, all of that, that will feel more the same to an audience than doing the same trick 10 times in a row, the same genre of trick, and changing the theatricality. Because audiences have an implicit understanding of theatricality, but they don't have an implicit understanding of magic. They don't go, that last trick was a transposition, and now he's doing a prediction. They just go, it's still standing in the same place. And if you watch a movie, they do this on purpose, right? Some scenes have music, some scenes are fast, some scenes are slow, some scenes have a lot of jump cuts. Sometimes in the middle of a scene, a sudden loud thing happens as we transition to the next scene. Audiences understand that because they're surrounded by it in every medium that they have. They listen to Spotify and suddenly track 3 is a ballad, and now the next song is super fast. In every single place that audiences take in any form of entertainment, any form of culture, theatricality is poured all over them like honey in every single moment. And then they go and see a magic show, and the person is standing in the middle of the stage doing their tricks at the same volume, the same speed, with no music for an hour. And we wonder why they don't think magic is as good as other art forms, or is interesting, or is theatrical, or doesn't hold their attention. Different tricks don't hold attention as good as texture does. Texture is everything in a magic show. And not only is it everything in a magic show, it's everything within a single routine as well. And if you can work that out, I think your show gets a lot better. So that's why I use those techniques, because I understand they're way more important than a new trick is. And once you understand it and you start to experiment with it, it becomes second nature. So to me now, sometimes the words I'm going to say in a trick, or the trick itself, is not the first decision. It's usually like, I really want to do something where the whole audience is in complete darkness and everybody in the room has the torch on their phone, which I do. Or for this next trick, the whole audience is sitting with their eyes closed and they're just listening to the sound of my voice. Or for this, it's more about achieving textural elements to me sometimes than it is about the tricks themselves. And sometimes it's about achieving aesthetic elements as well. A thing that I really love to do is imagine the best photograph of a trick. So if I've got a brand new trick, I'm thinking, if I was to take a photograph that really epitomizes what that trick is, now all I'm doing, the whole performance, is looking for how I can create that moment. So if the photograph is that I'm cracking an egg into a glass with this look, everything is built around getting to that place. And sometimes for me, I talked before about how in love I am with the pictures that are in this book. Sometimes it's about how can I catch, I think about like a historical mirror. So sometimes when I'm in a position on stage, I think, I'm looking at a reflection of Roy Benson
Yeah.
historically. I'm trying to get into a position that I've seen that performer do. So sometimes it's about creating a picture that I've thought of, and sometimes it's about reimagining or recreating a picture that I've seen. And the routine is built around getting to that moment and making that singular aesthetic thing happen. I hope that answers the question.
That answers it perfectly. That's one thing that obviously you know Tom Bolton as well.
Yeah,
Working on his show for the Fringe last year, that's one thing that we took because we didn't want it to just be a show where you have a pull-up banner, you stand in the middle, you've got a mic stand, everything comes out of a box, like you mentioned, which is what quite a lot of shows are nowadays. And it's those people that are changing it, like yourself, that are front running this theatricality. And as you mentioned there, it was great to hear those little things like what you want the people to convey, what emotions you want them to feel, how you want it to look aesthetically. Those tiny little details that you can pick up on and really change how your show feels. Like
yeah.
even things like lighting and sound can make people feel cold. It can make them feel excited. Like, oh, it's just so much fun to play with. And as you well know, the second you get into it, it's like a rabbit hole.
It's
Like you
so
start
exciting.
falling down it, you can pull different things in from different places, and yeah, the possibilities are endless.
It's like discovering a new trick again. You know, it's like
Yeah,
discovering magic again because you realize that you've got all of these multipliers. Tom Stone's got this great thing I saw him talk about in a lecture years ago where he has like a single dot and he's saying, you know, if you only know one thing, you can only do one thing. And if you know two things, you can now only connect them in one way. So
yeah,
you actually have got fewer connections than things that you know. And as soon as you put three things, you can connect those in exactly the same amount of things as things that you know. But as soon as you know four things, two, three, four, five, six, suddenly with four things, you can create more connections than things themselves. And when you get up to the point that you've got 12 things, you can connect them in 450,000 different ways. You know, growth is exponential. And so the more ingredients you add into this mix that you're capable of using, they're just layers on layers on layers, aren't they? Because you've got tricks. Tricks is layer one. Plots.
yeah,
A trick is layer one, the thing you can achieve. Like I am capable of making it look like I'm holding a ball, and now I'm capable of making it look like I no longer have a ball. That is a trick. But then we impose plot on top of that. And the way, the how the ball vanishes. And then if we impose intention on top of that, there's three layers there where now, why am I making this ball vanish? Am I making this ball vanish because it's exciting and I've realized I have this power? Or am I making this ball vanish because the ball is making me angry or upset and I want it to be gone? Like, oh, I hate this thing, go. And now it's back. Once you impose motivation and reasoning on top of plot, that's so much more interesting and dense. And then once you put that with music and other sounds that affect the audience emotionally, and then you dress that up theatrically, just something as simple as if I have a ball and now I do not have a ball can become a play, literally a whole
yeah,
play in itself. And so the more layers you learn about, the more and you don't always have to use all of them. That's overkill.
yeah.
But sometimes the simplest thing is the best. But the more layers you're capable of climbing up to, I think the more options you've got because the tricks that exist is small, but they've all got so many options. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes back to influence and where you can pull inspiration from. The more things that you physically ingest, the more content you intake, the more
Yeah.
music you listen to, the more stuff you watch, the performances, TV shows, the more you can draw those ideas from, and the more tools that you have in that toolkit to add those layers and to make those connections.
And it changes who you are too. You know,
Yeah,
you then become a different person when you look at things. So the person that you are before you've read everything, you know, someone who's read Shakespeare looks at the idea of vanishing a ball from a completely different angle just because
yeah,
they know more things. Shakespeare's, you know, just a stupid example. But you know, someone who's into heavy metal music looks at vanishing a ball in a different way than someone who's into pop music. We're just taking in more culture just changes who you are. And it doesn't just shape who you are, it also helps you to understand the definition of who you are, the things that you don't like. shape you as much as the things that you do like. So you just got to take in more and more stuff. I wrote a blog years ago, which is going to be in my book, where I said if you want to be an interesting performer, you should start out by being an interesting person. You know, that's because that's the thing behind it all. You know, the performer is really the puppet, but the puppeteer is the person behind the performer, and that's who you are in real life. So, yeah, start off by being an interesting person. I always think, as well, as funny. So many people have got. Um, I heard an interview. Ben Earl interviewed. Who's the brilliant guy who does card stuff, and he put out the book, the gambling.
Real specific. You might have to
Yeah,
narrow it down slightly.
the casino gambling protection book series thing. It's called
Steve Forte.
Steve Forte. Thank you, Ben Earl, and I'll tell you a really funny thing about Ben Earl. Actually, a question I often ask magicians is if you could use a time machine to steal an invention from anybody and have history remember you invented it, what would you steal? And I said to Ben, my thing would be I'd go back to Alan Jackson and I would invent aerial fishing because I've seen Matt King do it. And it's like, as far as plot goes, it's about as good a stand-up routine as there is. You know, it's just it's perfect. And if I could steal what Matt King added to Alan Jackson's thing and have history remember that as being mine, that would be legacy enough for me. And I asked Ben Earl, if you could steal anything from history that you invented it, what would it be? And he said the crosscut force. And it blew my mind because Ben Earl is this guy that can do anything, right? Ben Earl has never met a sleight that he can't do.
Yeah.
He's the best. But he chooses the crosscut force. And I thought about it for a really long time. And I realized that Ben's a lot smarter than any of us could have ever given him credit for because he recognizes the power of the crosscut force when delivered with timing and with the right attitude and all that sort of stuff. The thing that puts me off the crosscut force is that it reminds me of when I couldn't do a classic force. Now I go in there and it's like turning up with what do they say? When all you've got is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, or turning up with a gun to a knife fight. Because I can do a classic force when I need to force a card. I do a classic force because it's the most difficult way to, always force a card every single time, but I can do it. So goddamn, I'm going to do it. But Ben is not afraid of using things that he learned from his first magic book before he was very good at magic, because he's able to separate all the, rubbish and understand what is strong and what isn't. And that to me is a real genius. People don't like simple things they learned when they were first starting out, because it reminds them of when they weren't very good, right? And so we don't use those tools that we had in the early days, but Ben does. And then I heard Ben interviewing Steve Forte and talking about, magic and gambling sleights and all that sort of stuff. And I've interviewed a ton of magicians. I had my own podcast for a while. And I remember listening to it thinking, I would not be equipped to be the other side of this conversation. If I was the other end of a chat with Steve Forte, he would have made me look like a moron because he doesn't just know how to do gambling sleights. He lives in Las Vegas. He's been a dealer. He's been a consultant to Las Vegas casinos. He's really, really living that life. And when he talks about it, there's like a legitimacy that an actor could never hope to achieve with all the will in the world. And I understand why Daniel Day-Lewis wouldn't get out of the wheelchair when he was filming My Left Foot. And I understand why Robert De Niro really learned how to box when he was making Raging Bull and all of this stuff, because there's a legitimacy that you cannot learn without living that life. And Ben Earl was able to be the other side of that conversation in a way that I never could have been, because Ben Earl has a legitimacy, not the same quite as Steve Forte, but enough to make Steve Forte respect him enough to give him the real answers and to also even know what he was talking about when he said it. And I realized I couldn't be that guy. And so when we're talking about this thing of, just remind me of the question again.
Theatricality.
Theatricality, yeah. When we're talking about theatricality and all that sort of stuff, there's a legitimacy to it that that comes with living the life. And it blows my mind how many people do routines in their show where they casually say to the audience, so here's how you cheat at cards in Vegas. And they've never been inside of a casino. And they would know if they went inside of a casino that they don't let you touch the cards. Here's how you cheat at blackjack. Well, here's how you cheat at blackjack in England. If you put your fingers on the cards, you're outside in the car park 5 minutes later. And if they knew that if they'd ever even been in a casino, they would know that. But they casually say, oh, here's how you cheat at cards in Vegas. And then they do their ambitious card routine. And I just think that there are two things here that are interesting. Either do tricks about your real life, or use the tricks that you want to do as an excuse to go and have some adventures. Like if you're going to do routines in your show where you talk about gambling sleights and cheating at cards, book a holiday to Vegas and go and play at a table. And then when you come back and you tell the audience about it, there will be something inside of you that informs what you do that would not have been there before. So use the routines you want to do as an excuse to have adventures. You want to go and do a routine about silent movies, go watch 50 of them. You want to do a routine about Paris, go on holiday to Paris. Anything you want to do, go and live that life, or do routines that are about the life you've actually lived, and there'll be legitimacy there that isn't there otherwise. And I just think that there's theatricality in that too. There's theatricality in having a rich understanding of what you're trying to communicate because you've actually lived it, and that will inform your decision making as much as anything else. So when you say, why do I make the decisions I make, and put that theatricality in, it is because I love silent movies. I love old fashioned music. I love these guys behind me. I love, going to, I'm a real thing for like collecting a thing from a place and exploring and going on holidays and going to places to see unusual things and going to museums and artwork and all that sort of stuff. And that informs my show in a way that if I did decide, oh, I'm going to be quite postmodern and different and be modern, it's just not who I am as a person. So the decisions that I make are based on just who I really am. That's the most theatrical thing you can really do. Just be the person that you are trying to be on stage in real life. Go and have an adventure. That's my tip. If you've got a gambling routine in your show right now and you've never been inside of a casino, you're a moron. The audience can tell that you're lying. They still think the trick is cool, but they know they know you're not legit. And you get found out really quickly from people who have been there, because anyone who has been to Vegas is thinking you couldn't do that. It's not real. And so go and be Ben Earl to the audience as Steve Forte.
Jeez. That there alone is worth the weight of this podcast. That one tip. Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, the best way you can lie and portray a character is by telling the truth.
Yeah.
Like, everything comes from that legitimacy. And if you've got the story and the proof to back it, that comes across and that conveys, and the people can feel that and it emanates.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're lying, people can also feel you're lying, and then it doesn't carry the same gravitas that it does.
It's Hector Chadwick, isn't it? It's here I have a prediction. When I used to be a croupier, when I used to deal blackjack, on like as casual as that, we're going to say that. When I used to cheat at cards in Las Vegas, go back, because that's really interesting. Tell me that story. It's not a story. I just say it as an intro to this routine. Like we say these casual things, as if they're not important. But if you'd really done it, you'd be more excited about it.
Yeah. And that excitement comes across in the routine as well. Like, I think one thing that a lot of people, especially when I've seen people perform, you can feel that they're doing this for like the 10,000th time. And they don't have that same level of excitement that they would have the first time they were performing it. And I feel like spectators also feel that. If you come into a routine as though you're seeing and performing this for the first time, and you have that same level of excitement that you would have if you were doing it for the first time, man, spectators are going to love that so much more than if you go, so I've got a ball and a cup, and we're going to put the cup on top of the ball. Like, it's so flat and dead.
There's a great thing, Denzel Washington gets asked about why he thinks there's a certain movie, and I wish I could remember what it was, but he gets asked, why do you think it was important to have a black director? And he says, Steven Spielberg could have directed this movie, but Steven Spielberg doesn't know what it smells like when a hot comb goes through your hair on a Sunday morning before church. And it's like, there's something about lived experience. And he says, I think the thing is, this director could have gone and directed whatever, but Steven Spielberg has got a unique, Jewish perspective of growing up in that household, and this other director knows what it's really like to be black. You wouldn't get that out. There's a great bit in Get Out. Have you seen Get Out, the horror movie?
Yes, yeah.
Directed by Jordan Peele. There's a moment that really blew my mind in that movie, and it's when the lead character who's black, is talking to his girlfriend who is white, and she's talking about going to meet the family, and he says to her, "Do they know I'm black?" And she says, "They're not going to care." And he's like worried that she hasn't warned them. And if I'd written that movie or directed that movie, that line would not have been in there, because I wouldn't have understood that coming from that place. I would have never even considered, because of, privilege, that when I turn up to an interview, not being white might be something that was in the way. I turn up to every situation assuming that I'm going to be judged on merit, and other people don't live that same life. And when I heard that line in that movie, a thing just clicked with me where I thought, not everybody experiences the world in the same way that I do. And that's just such a perfectly obvious example within race, but there are loads of examples in that in life, within gender and all sorts of stuff, and height and attractiveness and intelligence, a million things that divide us in the way that we come. An accent, someone is looked at differently. You live in the Northeast. If you go into a bakery in Newcastle with a Sunderland accent, you get different service than if you've got a Newcastle accent. Those things exist everywhere. But there's something that there's real about lived experience when you can tell that it's legit. There's something as strong as that in that movie that was like an eye-opening, amazing moment for me when I watched it. And I see that in other people's performances when they say things and I know they meant it. I was on at a comedy club 2 nights ago, and the opening comedian, her name was Mel, and she told this story. It was quite pedestrian at one point, and then she said, "So then I started going to sex clubs," and she's talking about going to swinging clubs. And the way that I saw the audience like lean in, because we don't just like lived experience, but we also like unique perspective. And the generic thing of being a magician, and like when I was a little kid, I started learning magic because my granddad did it. There could be nothing less interesting to an audience than that, I think. Whereas if you have a different lived experience that you can actually say, it comes across. That story about how I became a magician that I told earlier, I couldn't have made that up. Or I couldn't have told it with that enthusiasm. There's something the truth is always interesting, no matter what it is. So either tell it or live it first. Seek out the things that you want to say on stage. Go and live them. What a great excuse to go on holiday. Research. So research for your act.
Is that what we're calling trips to Vegas to see magic shows and go to the casinos?
That's
research purposes. I'm sure the missus will love that excuse. Obviously, theatricality, legitimacy are all incredible tools that you can have within your sort of magical toolbox. Another tool that you use very predominantly in your act is comedy. Obviously, comedy can be used to disarm an audience. It can be used to naturally misdirect. It's a perfect misdirection. How can magicians who are not necessarily using comedy at current, how can they start implementing comedy and exercising that kind of thing? Because I was going to say, a lot of people naturally think, I'm not funny, I'm not comedic. Is there a way that people can go about trying to add that, or trying to be funny, or do you think it comes naturally?
Honestly, this is going to be the shortest answer ever, which will become as quite a surprise.
It's going to make up for all the other ones.
But I've got a great coda to this answer. If you are not the funny person in your group of friends, if you don't make your family laugh, if you didn't grow up being like people thinking that you were funny, and now you become a magician and you think, I'm going to suddenly find some you're not. You're not going to be funny. You're either funny or you aren't. Funny is not something that exists within the words that you say. It's not something that exists within the way that you act. It's something that exists just within who you are. You are either funny or you're not funny. And unfortunately, for people who aren't funny, there is nothing they can do about it. But my coda to this answer is, or at least that's my opinion, my coda to this answer is that magic is so good It doesn't need you to be funny. Like, what's
Yeah.
this lurch towards everyone wanting to be comedy magicians? Just be a magician. You don't need to be a comedy magician. If you're not funny, all you're going to do is make your magic look worse. Just focus on being really good at magic. It's dead interesting. If you've got a good story you can tell or a brilliant trick you can do, all you're going to do by trying to be funny when you're not is make it worse. You just don't need it. Comedy is not an essential tool of magic. And one of my favorite writers and film reviewer, Mark Kermode, who's a British writer and film reviewer, he has a bunch of books out, and I like all of them, and I would recommend all of them, especially if you're interested in movies and the history of movies and how movies get made and what it's like to be a film reviewer and all that sort of stuff. And he writes in a really interesting, good style. One of the things he says is that you can have a romantic film that's not that romantic and people will like it. You can have a horror movie that's not that scary and people will find something that they like about it. You can have a thriller that's not that thrilling. You can have every genre of movie. It will still do okay, but nothing tanks at the box office like a comedy that isn't funny. Because a comedy that isn't funny has got nothing to offer at all. You're either funny or you aren't. And if I've learned anything, and I've been a funny person, my whole life, and actually, and that's not, there's no ego thing in that. I've heard a lot of people say they became comedians so that they could be in charge of why people were laughing at them. And I really tally with that because people have laughed at me my whole life. And when I was a kid, I didn't understand why. And now that I'm an adult, I'm in charge of it. But you just don't need it. If you're not a funny person, it's all right. Magic doesn't need you to be funny. And if I've learned anything more recently, it's that sometimes I actually tone down how much comedy I'm trying to do because comedy is really unpredictable. There are nights that I go out, I say 100 jokes in my show, and every night, 70 to 80 of them get pretty decent laughs, but they're not always the same 70 to 80. And I wish that I could be someone that was really, really like perfectly solid, never fails. I've never seen John Archer not go well. I've never seen him go on and not get laughs for every single thing that he said. I'm sure it's happened, but I've never been there when it has. Someone like David Williamson, I've never seen David Williamson go on and every single thing he says not get big laughs. But I've been to all of my gigs and loads of times stuff that I've said has not got big laughs. So even if you are funny and even if your friends say you're the funniest person they've ever met, comedy is still not always the most reliable tool. So if you're not funny, honestly, you're playing with fire. I actually get annoyed about Cards Against Humanity. Everyone loves this thing.
Yeah.
The guy who invented that, by the way, is also an amateur magician, and he lives in Chicago. But I don't like Cards Against Humanity because I think it lets people who aren't funny find out what it feels like to be funny because they put down a card at a funny moment, like someone puts down a card that says in my fridge. And then, they put down a card that says Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. And everyone goes, oh my God, you're so hilarious. You're not hilarious. You had 6 things on your hand and you picked one of them and you put it down. And it annoys me that people who aren't funny get to feel what it feels like to be funny because being funny is hard earned sometimes. And you've put up with a lot of people thinking you were stupid or whatever to get there. So just leave comedy to the professionals. Not even that, not even leave it to the professionals, but honestly, don't even pick it up. It's too heavy and you don't need it. Magic is so good. It does not need you to be funny. And actually, if you're not funny, magic doesn't want you to be. Just be a brilliant magician. I've seen loads of magic shows where the person didn't aim for a single laugh. It's brilliant.
That is not the answer I expected, but I feel like it's the answer that both myself and a lot of people needed to hear.
Yeah, because every time you hear anyone go, how can people be funny? The person goes, well, there are several techniques you can use where you could try this and that, and you could do a course and you could, read these books and try some jokes, try and be relatable about your real life. Honestly, if you go and buy a loaf of bread and some milk at the shop and the person behind the counter doesn't laugh during the interaction, you're just not a funny person. Every time I go to the garage, the corner shop, every time I have to go into some meeting or whatever, I naturally find that I'm making people laugh just by who you are as a person. If that's not you, Why bother? It's pointless. You don't need it. Magic's really good. Just focus on that. And actually, as soon as you take that out of the equation, you'll find that the burden that lifts from you allows you to really focus on the thing that you are capable of being really good at. So do that instead. People like storytellers. Loads of storytellers are not funny. People like creative, talented people. People like watching displays of manual, hard earned skill. Doesn't require you to be funny. People like watching interesting plots and being blown away by surprise that comes at the end of a trick. Doesn't require you to be funny. 90% of great magic does not require you to be funny. I guarantee Matt King is a comedy magician because he was a funny kid. You know, it's just how it is. Don't worry about being funny. Don't need it.
Again, comes back to legitimacy, doesn't it? It comes back to living it. And
Yeah.
like, if you emanate funny, people will find you funny. If you don't emanate funny, then you're just trying. And it's the same with people hearing jokes and then trying to, convey the same joke across. If you're not a funny person, that's not going to hit regardless of how hilarious the original joke was, because it's not coming across with the same gravitas, the same tonality. Like,
they can even say it with the same tone, the same pace, the same everything. But if there's something about them that's missing, people just feel awkward. There's nothing worse. We've all had someone come up and tell us a joke, at the end of the show. I mean, I do. My shows are basically family friendly, and even when I perform for just adults, I don't swear. I don't say anything blue. I don't make any, thingy jokes. I have some innuendo or whatever, but I never say anything that's awkward. And we've all had that thing where someone's come up to you at the end and gone, here's a joke you can put in your act. Two prostitutes are walking out of a brothel and you think, did you not just watch the show? I would never say that. But then also they deliver the joke in such a seedy, awful way that the whole time you're just thinking, oh, please stop. Whereas someone who's funny will come up to you and they will be relatable and different and they'll be able to make you laugh.
You've offered an unholy amount of advice in what we've spoken about.
Don't
so
take
far.
any of it because I'm not famous. I don't live in a £1 million house. I haven't got a swimming pool and I've got a 10-year-old car. So don't listen to anything I say. It's useless.
But you've got a sensational show and an incredible career. So, I mean, we'll allow it. We'll take a few notes if that's okay with you. Obviously, you've given a lot of advice during this podcast and you're writing a book and things like that. If you could only give one piece of advice that you'd want everyone to hear, whether it specifically be magic, whether it specifically be comedy, whether it's just a life advice in general, what one piece of advice would you want to leave people with?
Oh, that's tough,
Bet you wish you had the questions now.
I do. There's always the bit, isn't there, in an interview where it's like, what one piece of advice could you give? And it's basically, it's impossible to answer. But
why it's you.
Yeah, if I was going to say anything, I would say maybe some advice that I wish I'd taken sooner or stronger is don't spend any time at all on your backup plan. The amount of times now that I meet people who want to be performers, sometimes I get asked to go in and talk to, like a lot of people that I went to school with have become teachers, funnily enough. And so I recently actually was near you. I did a talk at the Gosforth Academy School, to performing arts students. And I say to them, what are you going to be? And they say, well, I'd really like to be in the West End, or I'd like to be on TV, but I'm also doing, this thing and that thing, and I'm going to study accountancy and all that. And I just want to say, just do that then. If you're also going to study accountancy, or you're going to worry about your backup plan, just do that, because this life is never going to be for you. If you really want to be a performer, you have to be comfortable with months and months and months. Obviously, I'm 40 now and I've been in this game for a long time. So I'm talking from a point of this doesn't happen so much. You get to a point where I'm now doing a lot of shows a week. And if anything, I say no to more things than you say. So it does get better. If it happens, it gets better. But in the beginning, you have to be comfortable with, I lived in a flat that was £60 a week, and I had a card that I had to go to the landlady and get it charged with electric so I could put it in the meter to have gas and electric on. And frequently I would get a cold shower and sit with 3 layers on 2 or 3 nights because I didn't have enough money to get the electric back on. And I was lucky that I enjoyed reading, and I literally would have to charge this is while I was working at JB Magic, by the way. There were times when I was that skinned because I spent all my money on books, but I would literally have to go find places in public that I could charge my phone and stuff, because honestly, days in a row I had no gas and electric on in my own flat, and I would sit there in the freezing cold and eat beans on toast every single day, often cold because I couldn't cook them because I had no electric. You have to become comfortable with knowing that there's going to be a long period of discomfort before the thing you really want happens. And if you start out focusing on your backup plan, you're already not putting 100% into the thing that other people are putting 100% into. And there are all the excuses in the world. You can be not good looking enough, not tall enough, not have a nice enough singing voice, not be a good enough dancer, not have enough, whatever. The only thing there's no excuse for is getting outworked. If someone else is outworking you and you are more talented than them, then that's shameful. That's actually a shameful position to be in. And I know loads of people that are way better than the people I know that are successful, but they got outworked instead. And a lot of the time, that's the thing. So be willing to put up with a lot of discomfort. Don't ever let anybody outwork you ever for a single day. Because I guarantee somebody who's less talented than you is working harder than you are. And that's going to be the thing that puts them ahead of you. So don't focus on the backup plan. If you really, really want it, then only focus on that. And the other thing I know is that everything I've just said doesn't make any difference, because for the people who've got that mentality, they already know it. And for the people who don't, hearing me say it won't change anything about it. You either want it or you don't. And this life is massive, massive amounts of luck, chance. It's working with Michael Finney at a magic convention in 2016. It is being in a magic shop so often that some customers walk in when the owner is gluing two cards together and can't stand up. It is standing next to Russ Stevens at a convention while you're helping a different friend. It's all of those different things are lucky, but success is when luck meets preparation, and those two things together become opportunity. Opportunity is luck and preparation colliding. And so if luck happens to you, but you aren't prepared, those opportunities go past and you don't even recognize them. So don't focus on the backup life. Decide that you really want this and make sure you're ready for when the thing happens. Make sure you're ready. If someone says, can you audition tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, that you already have learned a monologue, you already can do a solo dance piece, you already know off the top of your head the 3 songs that you would sing. That's how success happens in this business. And even then, sometimes it doesn't happen. And you have to be prepared for that as well. So, you need to want it more than anything else. That's my advice. Don't focus on the backup life. And also, don't take anybody else's advice, because 90% of the time, the people who you're taking advice from are less successful than you want to be. So you got to forge your own path as well. Showbiz is full of stories of people who got what they got via a route that nobody else ever did. So don't listen to me either, because if you only want to be as successful as me, showbiz isn't for you either. Because I don't want to be as successful as me. I want it to go better. I want to have a 5-year-old car and maybe, the access to someone else's swimming pool.
So all of those notes that you've just taken, scribble them out. Scrap this whole thing that you just listened to. Just go do you. Go be you.
Just be you is everything, isn't it? Of course, but that's a bit trite advice now, because everyone says it. Live, laugh, love, and be yourself. But yeah, just want it, and work for it every day. Don't take your eyes off the prize. If someone ever says to you, "You're working on your act," well, yeah, but I've got to do. Just stop.
Yeah. Wow. There's some hard hitting truths right there. That's not even advice. That's just it's a slap in the face. Basically, it's like, wake up. You need to sort your shit out, which is what a lot of people need to hear. And
well, part of the reason as well that that I'm pretty open, maybe comparative, and give broad advice is that, and if someone else, no one's outworking me. I just know they're not. Every day I'm doing it. Every day I get the computer out, I sit, I put movies on, I sit in front of it, and I take stuff in, and then I read a bunch of books, and I make notes, and I think, how can I let this affect me? I'm working on it all the time. But also, I think I went to a lecture actually, it was just a chat after a show. There's a show, it's Showzam Festival at Blackpool. Might have been 2015, 2016, somewhere around that time. And the show was put on by Paul Stone, and it was called Showzam. It had Rob Torres, Charlie Fry, Jeff Hobson, Ben Stone. Who else? Wally Eastwood, maybe one other person. This brilliant, brilliant variety show. And I saw the show, and then afterwards there was a Q&A that you could pay to go to as well. And of course I went, because you could get a poster signed by all the performers. And I have that poster, it's up in the house. And I asked Charlie Fry, who's one of my heroes as well, juggler, amazing act, insane, completely different to everyone else. I think you can see a bunch of the aesthetic from his show in my show in a lot of ways. People like him and David Kaplan, and they've really influenced the way that I like the way things to look. And I said to Charlie Fry, do you ever, because I was just getting to this point where I was starting to have a few things that I was considering my own. And I said, do you ever worry about people stealing your act? And he said, if you're capable of stealing my act, you're welcome to it. And everybody laughed, and I went, God,
Yeah.
that's what I should be aiming for. So now I don't care. I'll give advice, and I'll do my stuff, and I'll perform at conventions and whatever, because I think you could steal some of the jokes that I say in the cups and balls. You could do the whole routine. You could steal anything out of my show. But it's such a complex set of things that, the jokes I say, the slights that I do, either you can deliver those jokes or you can't. Either you're willing to practice to the point that you can do those slights or you're not. But are you willing to get a custom cups and balls table made like I have with a banner that drops down and helps the aesthetic along? Are you willing to hunt down the Gazzo large size cups that are really difficult to get and expensive? Are you going to take the time to ring up every producer of cups and balls in the world and find out the perfect ones that nest inside of the cup, 3 of them together, and allow you to stack cups on top? Are you willing to create the screens that go behind when I do? Are you willing, my cups and balls routine is in English, Spanish, and French. Are you willing to learn enough of those 3 languages to say, here's how they do the trick in Spain, here's how they do it in France, here's how they do it in thingy? Are you willing to edit the music that I edit so that it, and that's the same with every single routine in my show. So I don't mind giving the advice, because the best advice I ever got was from Charlie Fry. If you're capable of stealing my act, you're welcome to it. So I'll give advice, because I think nobody's following in this path, because it just took too long, took too much patience, and it took learning too many different skills outside of just magic itself to put together the way that my act now looks, that I don't care who comes along and steals little bits or do whatever. Because if someone does do that, if somebody does come along and they do edit the music, they do make the video, they do make the screens, they do learn the slights, they do say the jokes, they do completely ape the act exactly as I do it, that's my fault, because I didn't work hard enough. So, that's all I can say.
I think that rounds up sort of perfectly exactly what we've spoken about today. What do you have going on? What do you have coming in the future? I know you mentioned a book there. Is that something that's an ongoing project that could be out in the next year, the next 20 years?
Ongoing for
What's
5
coming
years,
up?
yeah. Well, I'm working on the book. I've got a Vanishing Ink masterclass coming out in July. I think it comes out. It's already filmed. The whole of the teaching part is filmed, and I have taught my cups and balls, the multiplying bottles routine, billiard balls, loads of my stage routines. They're taught in full on that thing. So I've got that coming out in July with Vanishing Ink. I'm working on this book still. I'm going to be at the Chicago Magic Lounge in July. Currently, I'm on a tour with Haven, where I'm doing 4 and 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday, in different parts of the country from now until November, basically. Next week, which will be, I'm not sure when this comes out, but
It was out in 2 weeks.
Does it? Okay. So by the time you hear this, I will have done my first contract on Princess Cruises, which I'm quite excited about. It's not my first contract with them, but the Magic Castle did a collaboration with Princess Cruises, and they built a small version of the Magic Castle on board the newest Princess Cruise ship. It's amazing. It's genuinely, you walk in, it's mind blowing. It's like being in one floor of the Magic Castle. It's crazy. So I got booked for the very first voyage of that ever. Super exciting. Turned out that the ship wasn't ready when it happened. So I got cancelled. And then I was supposed to do the 3rd voyage a couple of weeks later. Still wasn't ready. The ship was in dry dock. So in the end, I ended up being the 3rd magician on there. A couple of other people did it in the meantime, but I got on there. And I did the gig, and it was a couple of shows a night over a week. It was super nice. The ship was amazing. The venue was great. I was really lucky again, preparation met luck and became opportunity. People from Princess Cruises came from head office, were on board the ship the week that I was there. They came to see my show. They enjoyed it. And they asked me if I would like to go back on Princess Cruises as a headline main theater act. And the first time that I take that contract is next week for me, 2 weeks ago for the people who are listening to this online. And so I'm about to start that whole new journey of being a headline Princess Cruise act and doing shows on there. And I'm really excited about it. I fly to Lisbon on Tuesday. So if you're listening to this, go and look on my Instagram and see how it went. I'm sure to post some pictures, and I'm going to be doing a few of those during the year. And aside from that, who knows what else will come along. I'm hoping to be out in LA for Christmas and some other stuff. So there's always things in the pipeline, but as I learned from talking to my parents, there are a bunch of things that I know should happen or can happen that won't end up happening. So I'll let you know when they're definitely happening.
Perfect. And if there's something that viewers can watch immediately, you mentioned earlier that you're going to have a show going out onto social media. It will be this evening when
Yeah.
we're recording, which will be a little while ago. So if you haven't checked that out already, I'll have that in the show notes and the description below. Definitely go check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, just look at my Instagram. I post a bunch there. Look at my YouTube, my Facebook, whatever. I'm pretty open. And also, I always post full routines. I post full entire 5 to 10 minute routines that I do. I never post highlights reels. And now I'm going to start getting into posting full shows because I had to get, for the Vanishing Ink project, I had to get loads of footage from things over the past. So Bob Hamilton, who films every Magic convention, was very kind. He provided me with video from every IBM convention and everything I've ever done. And I started looking through this thing, and I started basically making a flash drive. Funnily enough, all videos here. I started just collecting every piece of footage I could ever find of myself that anybody had, and putting them on this, so that if I drop dead next week, I could say my wife could give this to my son and say, "Here's who your dad was." And I just thought, oh, I'm actually going to start putting this stuff out. So I'm just releasing more and more stuff on YouTube now if people want to check it out.
Perfect. I was just about to say, where can our listeners find you? But there it is. Do you know what your social media handles are? Are they the same across the platforms?
Yeah, always just Mark James Magician Mark James, some version of that. You'll find me.
Perfect. Regardless, it'll be in the show notes or the description below. Mark, it's been absolutely incredible. We've spoken for, I think, nigh on 2 hours now. So it's been a long one. But everything that you said from start to finish has certainly affected the way that I'm going to start doing things. It's going to change a lot of the things that I'm doing. So I can't thank you enough for the advice that I've taken from this, never mind what the people at home are also listening to as well. So, again, thank you so much for an incredible and insightful conversation.
You're welcome. Thanks to anyone who made it this far.
Probably fallen asleep during the quickfire questions.
No doubt.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. If you have listened this far, if you want, leave a review. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see it fully unedited. If you're watching this on Spotify or Apple, it will be a significantly shorter, much smoother version without all the pauses and probably me nipping to the toilet in between as well. But thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.